I've noticed every single time I stream, it's always, hello, it's been too long, because I never stream, and that would be right. Since May of last year, I've been playing just about every single Final Fantasy game. I stopped before I actually got to the end of my little spree, because I still had replays due of the rest of Final Fantasy XIV past Heavensward, Final Fantasy XV, and even Strangers of Paradise left, but I can safely say that Final Fantasy XIV's replay had very much drained me, as well as that I honestly had no desire to go through 15 again, and as much as I want to play Strangers of Paradise, there is not many good ways to play it. First things first, let's just cover the games I haven't played, or attempted to play, I should say. Obviously, Strangers of Paradise, sadly. We've got Tactics Events, because I didn't know it existed. And among other things, like Crystal Chronicles, the Chocobo games, which exist apparently, Dissidia, Final Fantasy Explorers, and Final Fantasy Legend. These are all like side titles that honestly I didn't know existed, and I don't think most people do know. I've also got FF7 Remake. This is actually an important one. Honestly, I just never got around to playing it, and I don't have it. But I did play original FF7, and we will get to. Here is the list of games we have played. Ignore Strangers of Paradise. It was planned. I put it in the list, but we're just gonna have to assume he's in the beyond favorite game tier. So let's go into these. We've got all the mainline FFs, like 1, 2, so on and so forth to 15. We've got all the 14 expansions individually listed because I think they're all worthy of individual reviews, even if the gameplay is mostly the same, if not just improved with each one. And then we've got some side stuff as well, like 10-2, 13-2, Lightning Returns, Revenant Wings, FF Tactics, Type 0. They see the most prominent ones I could find. Anyway, let's get started. Let's start from the humble beginnings. Final Fantasy I. So Final Fantasy I have the least to talk about, because there's the least game in it, honestly. Final Fantasy I is like, it's a very simple game. It's the first Final Fantasy, you gotta give it. You gotta cut it some slack here. It's very short, it doesn't waste your time too much, it's very simple, which is kind of both a pro and a con. And it's also, at least the one thing I'll definitely give it, is it's a very replayable game. Because you can just you can keep changing your party composition, and there's a different playthrough each time in for that. And because the game's so short, there's like not many reasons you wouldn't want to like replay it over and over. But it does have a few problems. One has quite a few problems, actually. I mostly kind of dislike one as a game. Namely, this is a problem you'll hear often throughout the series, by the way. Normal encounters are consistently more difficult than the bosses. This one I found very funny in FF1, because in FF1, a lot of the normal encounters, they can just kill you, they can inflict you with poison, which is another complaint I have. Status elements in this game are very mean and very common. Whereas the bosses, I remember specifically there's one dungeon you go into and there's like a vampire. He died in 2 hits. The normal encounters die to less than more hits than that, so it's almost hilarious. The game has an insane high encounter rate. And I guess the main thing is like, there's just no real story, which, I mean, of course, there's no real story. I guess Strangers of Paradise would rectify that eventually, because that's like the FF1 game. But there's not really much going for it. One is just kind of an E-tier game. It's like, if you want a really simple JRPG with like nothing special to it, it's just, you go in, you're a party, kill the things, fight the evil bad. You know? Oh yeah, also it's got the spell slot system. I hate the spell slot system, it sucks ass. The spell slot system, for those not aware, is a system they used before NP. It's kind of like D&D rules, where you have level 1, level 2, level 3 spells and all that, and you have like select amounts of them. Games like Baldur's Gate have proven this can work, but in the early days of JRPGs, not a very good system. I think it's maybe fine with an action RPG, not very good with a JRPG where like your white mage and your black mage are doing 1 damage with anything but a spell. Yeah, E-tier game, it's just kind of tolerable. That moves us on to FF2. This one is interesting because Final Fantasy II is a game it's often criticized by a lot of people, and people say often that this is the worst Final Fantasy. This is the absolute worst one. There's nothing worse than this. I am here to say there is much worse in this series, trust me. So here's my hot take. Final Fantasy II is the best in the original trilogy. For the record, I think it's only slightly better than 1, which is not much. Like, just for context, it's E tier. This is like the 3 and 4 out of 10 category. Final Fantasy 1's like a 3 or a 4. It's like a 4, probably. It's fine, it's just not great. 2 is very much the same, but a bit better. Let's go over the pros. Again, not many of them, but much more prominent ones than 1, I'd say. First of all, there's an actual attempt at a story. Shocker, I know. This game has like a main party. A party of 3 because you lose your 4th party member early on. He's gone. He's like kidnapped and you're like trying to find him. It's cool. It's like, it's not much story at the start, but like it's better than 1, which is no story, basically. The game actually has fun comedic moments as well. Firion is a fun character. He's a typical protagonist, but like he gets into some fun situations. Or how like Guy, who is the other Guy party member, he can like talk to animals and he's not very smart. It's a pretty, I guess it's like a archetype, but like he's like an early example of like dumb guy who likes nature, which I guess is something. I don't remember the other party member's name, that's how forgettable she is. You'll begin to notice Final Fantasy's not very good at writing women, and you will find this across the series for a little while, until like, what? 6? Final Fantasy VI probably is the first good one with good writing. I'm not joking here. 4 will be prominent of this when we get to it. One thing as well, yeah, the grinding's tedious, and the grinding is a con of Final Fantasy II, because yeah, you level your defense by hitting yourself. It's not very great and fun. The grind isn't the worst in this series. It's a very tedious system, admittedly. It's just not like the worst thing in the world. I think people make it out to be way worse than it actually is. You level health quick enough, honestly. If you fight every encounter you have, it's pretty rare that you won't be leveling your defense and health enough. And if you do, you can just do a little bit of grinding and then you'll be fine. What I found in my run, Firion was, he ended up an all-rounder. He didn't have much attack actually, he had a lot of defense though. So he was kind of a good tank, even if he didn't have the most health. Maria is, I think she had like really low stats overall, but she had good magic stats, which is impressive in the game like 2, where it's really hard to level magic. Magic kind of doesn't scale very well in a game because it also, it's a weird system if I recall. This one I've got not much memory of how it worked because I didn't use the magic much. You don't really need it besides healing. You mostly just physical attack. I remember Guy ended up very overpowered. And also the last little positive for this game, status elements don't affect you out of battle. I remember it being one of the worst things in 1. You get hit by poison, and then you're just poisoned, and then there is nothing you can do about it besides go to like an inn or something, or hope you prepared some items beforehand. I guess I'll go into some of the cons. I mentioned the grinding. The system's not good. It's better than people make it out to be, but it's not good. There's a dialogue system in this game. When talking to people, you'll get this red text, and it will show you key things to make note of, and then you can use that information in later conversations. Now, this sounds cool on paper, and I thought it was cool when I was introduced to it, but it doesn't prove very useful in the end because they introduce this and you see red text and it's like, ooh, important information, I'm gonna ask someone about that later. The game just tells you who to use what information on, so there's kind of no point in it. You might as well have just had the character say the thing. It's just an extra step for the sake of RP, I guess, but the RP isn't. It's like if you were doing a D&D session, but you were being railroaded extremely hard. You're like, oh, I want to go bring up the topic of the airship to this guy. Okay, you do that. He doesn't know what you mean. Move on. Thanks, Final Fantasy II. Besides that, I'm gonna talk about the elephant in the room in this game. The status element bug. Final Fantasy II has an infamous bug. Basically, status elements will have 100% chance of working. Every single status element has a 100% chance of working. This is especially notable in the final dungeon of 2, where, is it Curls or Crow? I don't know how you say them. Curls? Carol? Those cat enemies. They have insta-death on hit. Insta-death. They kill you. You can imagine how that experience was. There's an encounter in this game, which is 4 curls, and they're all just there, and they're very fast enemies. So what happens is, typically speaking, you might just die, and there's nothing you can do about it, unless if you get lucky and someone is fast enough and the RNG favors you to go first. If you get to go first, if you have the Confuse spell, you can hit them, and then they will kill each other because of their 100% insta-kill rate. It's very funny. I didn't mention in Final Fantasy I, the final dungeon sucks, and in Final Fantasy II, the final dungeon also sucks. This is gonna be a common theme. You'll know that, like, a final dungeon is good when I start screaming about it, because if I'm not mentioning the final dungeon, you can assume it's bad. Final Fantasy has a tendency to make their final dungeons the worst dungeons in the game, and I don't know why. With that all in mind, it's a very weird game, but it's not as bad as people make it out to be, and it has an actual story with characters. Oh, I completely forgot to mention, guest party members. So you have a bunch of guest party members. There's Joseph, Minwoo, Layla, 2 others. Spoiler 1, I think, and then 1 other. If I recall, like, half of them die. One common thing is guest party members drop like flies. There is a moment where you get a party member, he joins you for 2 dialogue boxes worth of reason. He then joins you in the dungeon, and then he dies, and that is it. You get no time with this character to get any sort of affection for him, and he is just dead. 2 is a tolerable game as well. It's at the top of the list, it's above 1. Now, speaking of less tolerable games, let's talk about Final Fantasy III. Final Fantasy III. Oh, Final Fantasy III. This is a game that people will say is their favorite Final Fantasy. I've seen people say this is their favorite, or it's actually really good, or it's the best of the trilogy. As you can hear, one of the positives is the OST is fantastic. 2 is the one the internet says is bad, and I said it was good. I said it's okay. So get ready for this one. So Final Fantasy III is the one people say is good, and there is something that needs to be acknowledged beforehand. Final Fantasy III is a game that is important to the evolution of JRPGs themselves. This is a very important cult classic. It introduces job systems. It's a very important game to the history of the franchise, and of all JRPGs, honestly. So credit where credit is due. So I do think Final Fantasy III is a very creative game. I love how spells you learn throughout the game are used in traversing the world, like how you cast Tiny to go through a little tiny village, and then you have to use that tiny spell to go through a little hole, which I think is very creative. There's a lot of cool things like that. There is a moment in the game where the world is revealed to be much bigger than you think it is. You have a world map, and then you find out the world you were in is so tiny compared to the actual world map. Amazing reveal. It's a really good twist. It's very, 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 very creative. And also, the final boss is genuinely really fun and challenging. Now let's get into the cons. 3 has a lot of problems. And I think people kind of praise this game blindly because I don't think a lot of people have played it. I think people praise it for the legacy it has and not for the game it is. First of all, the story is incredibly boring. The story is not all that interesting. Of course, it's the basic, like, get the crystals, beat the bad guy. It's going to be, it's an early Final Fantasy, but it is worth mentioning that the story is basic as hell, and even if it's an early game, I do have to evaluate this in the context of all of Final Fantasy as well. One problem with this game as well is the main party is a party of nobodies. I believe the DS version of this game, which I didn't play, actually makes them characters, so maybe this game would have a few points more if I played that version. What I played was the remaster. The 4 characters you play as are blank slates. The thing is with that, if you have a party of blank slates, you really need to give them a 5th person, like someone to be there for them, to actually be there as an actual voice for your group. The party don't feel like people, they're just kind of blank slates, and the guest characters you don't get guest party members at all really. You get like some people who might join you on the tail end, but they don't join in fights, but none of them are really that interesting. I guess Desh is fun. Desh is a fun character, but he's also like got 20 minutes of screen time and then he's just gone. The grinding in this game is the worst of the original trilogy, I would argue. It's kind of just expected of you, but at very random and inconsistent points. There are points in the game where you don't have to grind at all and the game is easy, and then suddenly you just get a random balancing issue and you just have to kind of grind a bunch. It's a spell slots game that relies on spell slots again. 2 doesn't have this issue because it doesn't rely on spells too much, but 1 and 3 do. Especially with 3, where it is a class system game. And some of the spellcasters are kind of good. You have to grind for them. Putting a spell slot game with a really heavy grindy job system game where you earn job points but cannot cast many spells before you have to return to an inn again just isn't very good design, because it means you can only grind for so much before you just have to head back to an inn and then come back out and then go back in and head back out. It really kind of slows down the process. Also, I would argue this game doesn't have a great execution of the job system. That I can attribute to a testament of its time. It was the first time they tried something like this, and kudos, but you didn't do it very well. So, Final Fantasy III, that's our first F tier game. I will note, this is the top of F tier though. I will say this ahead of time, this is going to be the top of F tier. 3 is almost with the original trilogy up here at the bottom, but it just has too many issues. It's too slow for such a short game, it requires too much grinding compared to others, and it's just kind of boring. The story isn't enough to keep me engaged either. Compared to 2 and 1, 1 has a lot of the same problems, but it's a much shorter game. It doesn't really require much grinding, so it doesn't drag on as long. And the difference with 2 is 2 has an actual story that feels like interesting, and it has characters, which I like, which 3 doesn't. At the very least, 3 has like 1 or 2 really cool scenes near the end of the game, which were like really fun to watch, but like still it's F tier. Next up on our list is Final Fantasy IV. This game is a treat. I love Final Fantasy IV. It's a very good game. It's not without faults. It's not going to be at the top of this list, I will say that now, but it's very good, and let's go over why. First of all, this is a very lovable cast of characters. We got fucking Kane Highwind, we got Cecil Arvey, we got Rydia, others. The story is, it's both a pro and a con. The story is fun and interesting, but very basic, I will say. But that's fine. It does its purpose. 4 has one of my favorite OSTs as well, which is saying a lot for Final Fantasy. This is another game with an amazing final boss fight. And also, this game actually makes, for once, the first time in the series, it makes death feel meaningful, because characters die, or they come near death, or they do things that they believe are going to kill them. You generally think they're going to die. When a character actually dies in this game, you're like, oh, shit, okay. Wow, because you actually had time with them. That's the important thing, you get time with these characters. But let's go over some of the cons. 4 does have some problems. First of all, like all the previous ones, Final Fantasy IV has a few really annoying bosses that are just not fun to fight. There's a few boss fights that are just not very well designed, which isn't much of a complaint, but it's something worth of note. But like I said, the story's interesting, but a bit too basic, especially when you compare the other FF titles. Some stories are going to get much more interesting. This game is another example of Final Fantasy not writing women well. Rydia is a good character, but Rosa exists to be Cecil's wife. It's really sad, because I think she has a lot of room to be a good character. And she is written to be Cecil's wife. Also, the Sylvan Cave, this is an area in the game, it sucks ass, it has Marlboros, this is the first time Marlboros are annoying, but yeah, overall this game's really good. It has a few little dimples, a few issues, but it's a solid, like, B-tier game. This is a solid game. It's very fun. If you want a simple JRPG that has just a fun cast and good story, then you can't go wrong with 4. And the gameplay is not too annoying either. You don't really have to grind too much at all. It's very well balanced. It's just a good game, honestly. Now, we've gone from a good game. Let's go to what might be the worst game in the series. Final Fantasy IV, The After Years. Where do I begin with Final Fantasy IV, The After? You know what, let's start with the pros. There's a few pros to this game. There's not much. There's not much. There's some stuff that saves it from being a 0 out of 10. But it's there. We gotta acknowledge it. I have 3 positives for this game. Only 3. First things first, this is a game it's divided in chapters based on what characters you play. So the first chapter is like Theodore's, who's the new main character for this one. He's Cecil's son. And then you have like a chapter for Yang and a chapter for Edge and his crew. And they all vary in how good they are, but for the most part, they're pretty bad, honestly. Palom has a really good chapter though. I don't care for his character development being that he's just a misogynist. I do appreciate them making him like a general dickhead for the sake of this chapter, because it does make for a very good character moment for him. Because in Palom's story, he is training a new white mage who wants to be a black mage. That's a compelling idea. I like that, you know? It's a good idea. It's a world where black mages and white mages all train in their separate schools, and they just kind of do their own thing, and then it's always been tradition, but this really gifted white mage wants to train as a black mage. So Palom has to teach her the literal basics of the game, which makes sense as well from a gameplay standpoint, because you're playing as someone who makes sense to be level 1, even if they have the magical talent, because she's a white mage. I like that. It's cool. Leonara, who is the character he's training, is one of the good new characters. There's not many, trust me. Palom has a good story. It's a solid story. It's a good 7 out of 10. It's good. And Kane's route is also pretty good for the most part. From a story standpoint, it's good. It's a natural evolution for Kane. He becomes like a holy dragoon or something. He kind of goes through the same development Cecil does, but in his own way. It's good. Besides that, the new characters are hit or miss, but like some of them are pretty good. Leonara, for one, is good. Ursula, who is Yang's daughter, is a good addition. Luca, who is a dwarf who trained under Sid, is a fun character for the most part, but that's where my compliments end. Let's talk about the negative, because there's a lot of them. In my notes, the first thing I wrote in cons was everything. Okay, let's get into the actual details. First of all, the moon system. The fucking moon system. Alright, so after years really wanted to like create something new and fresh for Final Fantasy IV's gameplay, and you know what, I appreciate the idea. On paper, it doesn't sound too bad, right? The moon system is basically an environmental buff nerf for everyone. There are 4 damage types in this game outside of like elements. There is just attack, physical, which is your basic attacks and like physical abilities. There's black magic and white magic. They are 2 separate ones. And then there is thrown, like shurikens and such. And how it works is there are 4 phases of the moon. There is like the full moon, half moon, crescent moon one side, crescent moon the other, and then no moon, whatever it's called. And each of these buffs one of those types of damage and nerfs the other. So one moon will be buff physical, nerf white magic. The other is buff black magic, nerf throw. Those might not be what they actually are, but you get the idea. So this would be fine in a game where you have your full party from the start, because you could plan around the moon and you could swap out reserves for when it is needed, and that would be good. But this is a chapter-based game where every chapter you have about anywhere from 2 to 3 party members, 4 if you're lucky. Or not lucky in the case of Rydia, who has 2 party members that are completely useless and the worst in the game. So, imagine this. You're in the first chapter of the game. You are playing Theodore and Hooded Man. Ooh, it's Kane. And they are both physical damage dealers. And Theodore has a little white magic. Now, you're on the phase of the moon that boosts physical damage and nerfs like black magic. Great, there are no faults here. I am happy and going about my day. Oh wait, the phase of the moon changed. What is it now? A nerf to physical damage and a buff to thrown? Wow! It's a shame that doesn't benefit fucking anyone. So what do you do in this situation? What do you do when you literally deal half damage every fight and have no actual upside? You would think you just have to rest, right? Because that resting swaps the type of moon. Problem with that, tents are limited in this game, and you can't just find them anywhere. So, using a tent is crucial. You have to really make sure you're using your tent at the right time. Otherwise, you could be stuck in a moon system that fucks you up, and then you have to wait it out. Like, you have to wait out the time. And that is not fun, especially in a game that demands grinding. After years is so poorly balanced, you are expected to grind. This is especially true in the part of the game I actually dropped it at, in Kane's route, where Kane and Theodore are a whole 10 levels too low for the boss of the area. So you have to level up by 10 levels in a single dungeon with a moon system and probably like 2 tents on hand. It's not fun. It's really not fun. Besides that, there's still some other problems. Character assassination is a huge deal. Like, for example, Edge. Edge in the first game was he was a fucking fail guy, like real fail wife energy, because like he was the guy who always tried flirting with women, but like he was always messing up. He just always failed, and it was always like it was charming in a weird way. Because he wasn't like a creep about it, he just kind of like flirted a little. He's not like too bad. In After Years, he's just a straight up pervert. In After Years, he very openly and kind of like verbally sexually assaults like this other female ninja that he's teaching, and it's really uncomfortable. It's not nice. It really sucks to see this. Yang is another one who gets character assassinated. He doesn't get assassinated per se, but his development isn't nice to see because he's essentially a bad dad. He missed his daughter's birth because he was too busy training. And you'd think they'd do something with that, but it's just kind of expected. It's just kind of explained like, oh yeah, that's just how he is. And it's like, okay. I thought this was the guy who like cared for his wife more than anything and was like a kind soul deep down, even if he was a bit stoic. This game is in bad games. It's at the bottom. I don't think anything will go below this. 1 out of 10, bad game. Moving on, Final Fantasy V. This game is pretty alright, actually. I don't have many notes on Final Fantasy V because Final Fantasy V I don't have too much to say about, actually, funnily enough. Its pros are very evident and so are its cons, and this is one of my few Final Fantasy opinions that I don't think is too different from the fanbase. Like, this is, like, almost dead on. But let's get into it. Pros for Final Fantasy V. This game has a very fun cast. I really like the main character, Bartz, is just like this literal nobody dude who just kind of shows up and he's just involved. And I love that. That's fun. That's different from every other FF so far. I like that it's just some dude. He doesn't have anything special. He is just a guy. We have Lena. Lena's a fun character. I think FF5 has another issue with writing women. Kind of does. There's one character I will mention who's really good. Faris. I think some people have said like Faris is very like non-binary coded or like trans-coded or whatever. And you know what? That's like actually very understandable based off like what the game gives you. So go for it, you know? But either way, Lena is like okay. She doesn't like get as much time as I would hope for, I guess, and she's relevant to the plot, but she's not like super interesting. She's like fine. She's just okay. She's a C tier character. But then we have one of my favorite characters in all of Final Fantasy, and that is Galuf Helm Baldessian. Galuf is the GOAT. He's just a fun guy. But more than that, he is the reason for what I think is the single best cutscene, single best scene in a Final Fantasy game. It's so hype. I'm not gonna spoil it because I think people should experience it for themselves. But Galuf has one of the best scenes in Final Fantasy, and I think that alone makes Final Fantasy V worth playing. Besides that, 5 uses 3's job system, but better. It's not great. I think job points and how they're dealt with are kind of weird for some jobs and just require grinding, but I also know that this system is just not for me, as opposed to just being objectively bad. Besides that, final boss again, incredibly challenging, incredibly fun. Most bosses are really fun. Gilgamesh is also one of my favorite characters in Final Fantasy, and this is his debut, and his debut is excellent. Gilgamesh is a very fun antagonist slash anti-hero. He has amazing character development. I love him whenever he shows up. Like, whenever he shows up in a cutscene, I just have a big, goofy smile on my face. It's just very fun. But let's get into the cons. There's some cons with this game. FF5 is a difficult game, I want to say. It's very, very grind-heavy. And there are times in this game where it feels unfair to an unfun degree. Like, I like games that give a challenge, but this game is just... it's sometimes just too difficult out of nowhere, and you really need to grind for it, and that's just not a fun feeling. This game is a game separated in acts. There's an act 1, 2, and 3. The first 2 acts are brilliant. They are like 8 out of 10s, honestly. I think the third act drags on for way too long and is kind of boring, which partially is probably due to the main villain, Exdeath, not being very great. I understand what purpose he serves, but he's just kind of especially in like the line of FF villains we have. He's kind of down there. And also, once again, FF5 is another game with an unfun dungeon. I can't believe I didn't mention it with 3. I didn't mention Crystal Tower at all, and I think I didn't mention Crystal Tower because the trauma was still hitting hard. I think there's another reason I didn't actually mention Crystal Tower when talking about FF3. And I think it's because people don't talk about a potentially worse dungeon, actually. The Interdimensional Rift is not fun. It's a slog. You go through 9 separate areas. The difficulty is insane, and you need to grind so much for it. I mean, it's a shame because the final boss of the game is like a really fun type of challenge, but the whole final dungeon sucks ass. There's some story moments in there that are really good, but that's kind of... So where does 5 go? 5 is a decent game. It would be up here, probably above 4 actually, if the final act was good. But the final act is like, it's like the game is an 8 out of 10, then an 8 out of 10 again, and then it goes down to like a 4, 3, somewhere around that way. It doesn't, it's really bad last act for me. But what I will say about FF5, this is a game you could give an S tier or an F tier, and I wouldn't argue with you. There's valid reasons to love or hate this game, and you know, you do you, however you feel about that. Now, this next one. Oh. We can say right now of this song playing, the single best intro to a game I've ever seen. The single best. Final Fantasy VI is amazing. I have so many positives for this game. You can probably guess where it's going, but we will find out together. Let me reveal something to you. When all is said and done, we're gonna put a game up here, but not until I've gone through the others and put them all in S tier and figured out which is the best one. Let's do Final Fantasy VI. FF6, it's one of the most engaging FF stories. I'm not spoiling anything from this game. What I can say is the twist of the second arc is perfection. This game has a top 3-ish OST for me in all of FF. It has one of the best villains in the series. It's a huge cast, but like almost everyone is really good. It's one of the few Final Fantasies that actually make me cry at one point. And also, if you know, you know, top tier final boss fight in this game. And also you get to suplex a train at one point, so that's pretty cool. Let's go into the cons though. We haven't got many. I had to really think on cons for this game, but there are some. While the extremely large party does get handled mostly well, I think by having such a huge roster, some characters suffer for it. I think characters like Gal and Mog don't get as much time as I would have liked, and Go-Go and Umaru are nothing burgers. I think they're supposed to be. They're just like little gimmick characters you can get in your party, but I would have liked something about them. The final dungeon is cool on paper, but in execution it does lead to a lot of like resets, because what FF6's final dungeon does is it splits the party into 3 smaller parties. I'm a bit hungry. I have caramel waffles here, they're really good. Add caramel waffles to the pros of Final Fantasy VI. Thank you, Final Fantasy VI. So, Final Dungeon. So what it does, it splits the party into 3 groups. And there is an inherent problem with that. In a game where your party is often the size of, like, 4, you don't really want to use so many party members and level them up to be ready for the final area. But you're kind of made to. One of your parties is going to be way strong enough. One of your parties will probably be okay. And then another party is gonna suffer hard. Admittedly, this game is a bit easier to grind thanks to like one area in the game, which makes grinding quick, but regardless, it's still a chore to grind in the first place. So you are kind of expected to grind for the final dungeon, which is just not a fun expectation to have. And some of the bosses on the alternate routes for the smaller parties are just not very... They're not fun bosses, honestly. I had to really dig for cons for this game, because there are not many, and that is why it's peak, baby. FF6 goes straight into S tier. It's an amazing game. Absolutely amazing. Alright. Final Fantasy VII. So, one of the, first positive pros I put for this game was that one of the Chocobo tracks looks like an Amogus, so let me just get that real quick. Here's another little Amogus. Isn't it great? Anyway, we've seen our little Amogus, let's move on. That's a positive. That gains it a few points, trust me. You're lucky I don't have the image of the other Amogus in the casino place. FF7, one of the single best cast of characters in all of FF. Cloud is amazing, Barrett's amazing, Tifa is the best, Aerith is amazing, Red is alright, Cid is amazing, and I think Cloud is one of the best protagonists in Final Fantasy. He's a really good character. Just for him alone, I can understand why people say FF7 is their favorite game in the series. I think FF7 has the second best opening to an FF game behind 6. I love the whole scene of the bombing mission. It's just amazing. I think, despite how well known and memed it is, I think Aerith's death scene is amazing. Honestly, the whole story and everything, like, this game is beautiful. But 7 has very notable problems, and let's get into them now. First of all, Jesus fucking Christ, Final Fantasy. This is where the sort of pattern of extremely unfun minigames comes from. And we're gonna get into this more later in other games. But 7 is the reason this happened. 7 has so many minigames, and like, so few of them are fun. They're so bad. A lot of them do not function. They have tight button presses. They're just not fun. They are not fun. I think people remember the bike and snowboarding sections so wrongly. Yo, hop on the squatting minigame. Unironically, squatting minigame might be up there in terms of FF7 minigames. That's our next tier list. Final Fantasy minigames tier list. Yeah, once again, Final Fantasy VII is another Final Fantasy that fails to have a good final dungeon. The main problem with 7's is weird save point issues. For example, you have to do like a boss rush almost before fighting what FF7 so correctly calls him Bizarro Sephiroth. Now let's get into that. FF7 has translation issues, and they are pretty bad. Some of these translations are not too harmful, but like, are bad that they're there. Some of these translations are actively harmful. For example, the classic one where the game tells you to attack while the first boss's tail is up, which I think is a good little bit of trolling from Barrett. And in one case, there's even a slur. So like, you know what? How do they do it? I don't know. Either way, I mean, I know the story is that it was one guy who was made to translate the whole game. And you know what? Considering he got so much close, I can only give props, but also, like, the stuff with, like, mentioning Sephiroth clones, which is just not what is said, it's, it kind of harms the actual story, because things just do not make sense because of these translations. And I guess I'll go into my main issue with the game. So, I think when people say they like FF7, I think a lot of people forget what most of the game is like, because the thing with FF7 is, let's put it into sections, right? We got Act 1, 2, 3, but let's do it more like this. You have the Midgard section, which I think is amazing. I think that is one of the best parts in the game. Then you have everything from after Midgard, like going to Calm, all the way up until, like, Aerith's death. I think most of that is really boring. I think everything up until the build-up of when, like, Aerith first leaves the party, and just before that, from Calm till then, is mostly really boring. There's a few like good story moments, like when you go through Cloud's like memories and he tells his story, or like going to Cosmo Canyon for the first time. There's a few good things like that. For the most part, it's really boring and it really drags on. And then you have Second Disc, which is like really good, but it's the part no one remembers. This is the part where like Cloud's in his little situation, let's just say, and you have like the dreamscape thing and a lot of good character development. The party splits up at that one point. It's all really good, you know. And then Act 3 is just the final dungeon, which is crap, besides the final boss, of course, because Sephiroth is amazing. But yeah, FF7's it's really good overall. It's like, this game is barely held together. It feels barely functional at times. It's like the game is held together with duct tape and glue. And you know what? That I couldn't think of a more apt description of it. The game's way too overambitious, you're right. It tried to do too much. Admittedly, it worked out because obviously FF7 is now one of the single most like well-beloved JRPGs of all time, maybe one of the games of all time. But it did try to do too much, and I think a lot of people rate it based off nostalgia. But despite that though, I do think 7 goes in A tier. Despite any faults I have with it, I think the game is just, it hits in a certain spot, you know? It has a certain charm to it, and I just can't resist that. And, like, even if the gameplay is not great, really, and, like, the story drags at points, it does hit on a lot of notes, and I think the story overall and the characters are just what make it. Now we're going off the trail a bit. I mean, we did After Years, but it's Crisis Core time. Zack time. You might notice I put the images of Crisis Core as Zack T-posing. That is because Crisis Core doesn't actually have a logo, unlike all these other FFs, so there wasn't really much I could do there. I could have put Crisis Core, but like I wanted to fit in a square, so you get T-pose Zack. You're welcome. Let's talk about Crisis Core. I think the dub is part of the charm. I think the funny dub moments, like, what are you after? World domination. It's not even funny, man. This game has amazing dialogue, actually, I love it. No, Crisis Core is a very funny game, but what I will say is, regardless of the dub's direction or whatever, because I know these voice actors are actually very talented, despite that, there are some scenes that are really good. In dub-wise, the voice acting can be really good at times. Zack, I think, is a very fun protagonist. He's one of my faves. The gameplay's actually really fun. It's an interesting system. It's like action RPG-ish. Yeah, that's really good. I guess one thing I can appreciate as well is the characters of FF7 are inserted, like, very realistically into Crisis Core. Like, they don't feel the need to, like, go, hey, it's everyone from FF7! You remember these guys. I really appreciate a side game like this not trying to, like, have its cake and eat it too. It's doing its own story. And I like that. It's a good story as well. It's the prequel to FF7, and outside of some things, which we'll talk about now, it's really good. Also, I think Crisis Core has the debatable tied best ending of Final Fantasy. The other also belongs to a side game. I wonder if anyone can guess which one that is. Crisis Core's ending is very good, very emotional. Might make you cry, actually. But let's talk about the cons. Gacked. Gacked. Yeah, gacked. We meme about Gacked. Gacked is funny, but the character he plays, Genesis, is very weird inclusion to this game. He's meant to be the main villain, but he's kind of boring and, at best, unintentionally funny because he's Gacked. His existence actually messes with the pre-established FF7 canon because he is inserted into a scene where he otherwise wasn't in the original FF7, which makes no sense. The final boss is embarrassingly easy, yet the final dungeon is one of the least fun in all the series as well. I always hate these. It's a puzzle dungeon that uses a riddle, and normally I don't mind figuring out a good riddle, but if I'm playing an action RPG where normally I'm not thinking much and pressing one button, I'm not in the mindset to think about a riddle. I just want to play as Zack and hit things, you know? If I remember right, I don't even remember it being that good a riddle. It was kind of annoying. And the solution was a bit weird and tedious. And while I do say the gameplay's fun, it does kind of get boring very quickly. But at the very least, the game's very short, so it doesn't overstay its welcome too much, which is nice. But yeah, this game is alright. Also, once again, Final Fantasy cannot make minigames. This game has a stealth mission, and it is awful. It doesn't function properly, and it is bad and sucks. Anyway, Crisis Core is pretty good. I'm going to put it in C tier. It's somewhere between these two. You know what? No, it's the bottom of B tier. I think it will go in the bottom of B tier. We might change things as we go along. But for now, bottom of B tier. Okay. I'm very excited to talk about this one. The other FF7 side game. This is Dirge of Cerberus. Dirge of Cerberus. Oh. I think it should be telling when I can finish Dirge of Cerberus and not after years, alright? And I'm gonna get into why. Dirge of Cerberus, as far as I'm aware, this is the Final Fantasy game that like YouTubers love to shit on because it's funny to make fun of it. But this game is not that bad. First of all, this game is stupid. You might think that's a con. However, this game is stupid and wears it on its sleeve. And that is amazing. The protagonist is Vincent, and Vincent is the most typical early 2000s edgelord you can imagine, and I love it. It's very funny. This man is the funniest protagonist in all of ever. His solution to most situations is by pulling out a gun on someone. Tell me you don't want to play a character like that. This game is both intentionally and unintentionally funny. The story tries to take itself way too hard, way too seriously, but I think it kind of knows how cheesy it is at the same time, and I can't help but respect it. As well as that, the final boss, this is half a pro and half a con, because it has two phases. The first phase is extremely fun, and the second phase is extremely piss easy and not challenging and very boring. Dirge of Cerberus has some other fun things. I think the gameplay is surprisingly actually fun. We will talk about what people complain about with Dirge of Cerberus later, because the thing with Dirge of Cerberus is people say the gameplay sucks. Why is it a third-person shooter? That makes no sense. Why did Final Fantasy do this? I don't think it's that bad a third-person shooter, but it does have issues, and I think they're mostly quality of life, actually. I think there's fair reasons to bully this game, and I don't think the gameplay is fully one of them. And it doesn't really get old, actually. Like, the gameplay style is, like, consistently just alright, you know? It's not amazing, but it's not bad. It's just fine. I'm also going to mention, I have this in prose, there is a funny little gag in this game with a fake potion called a Potoin, spelled Potoin. I thought this was a bug, because it's a potion that heals for 1 health. And apparently, the Potoin was intentional as a joke. I think that's hilarious. I think more games should troll their players like that. But as expected, this game does have more cons and pros, but you might find it higher rated than you might expect. Forgetting the ironic value, the story just sucks. I think it actively ruins some parts of FF7's story. A bunch of FF7 classic characters feel a bit shoehorned into the story, unlike how Crisis Core does it. It's almost lazy fan service, like, oh, there's Cloud and Barret and all that. It's like, they don't need to be there. The original characters of this game are extremely forgettable for the most part. If I found a character notable, it's because of their voice actor, as opposed to their character. And here's the gameplay issues with this one. First of all, the camera is really weird in this game. It doesn't function properly. It's a very weird camera. Sometimes it just likes to glitch around or like end up in walls or whatever. The controls are these weird tank motion. So this is what people would complain about, I think. It's the tank motion controls. You can run and jog and all that and in horizontal and vertical directions. Perfectly fine. But if you attempt to move diagonal while you're already moving without stopping your momentum beforehand, you walk, and you're forced to walk like a strafe. And that's kind of weird. Honestly, it would be fine if it was just tied to a button, like a strafe button. Then the game would actually have like very few issues gameplay wise. But sadly, it's a forced thing, and you just kind of have to adapt your movement around it. Once you figure out how to get around that and you know to like stop and then run, it's not too bad, but it is an initial hurdle and it's not a very fun one either. I don't know why they designed the controls like that. They really just had to add a strafe button instead. As well as that, some enemy types are just like pure BS. You'll find often that if you're getting hit by one enemy and you're surrounded by loads, you just get comboed to death. Situations like that are very common in this game. Luckily, most of the boss fights are like really fun, and like you don't get that too often besides one of them. But regular encounters, you can sometimes have like loads of enemies surrounding you, and it's just that you really have to take it slow. But like overall, I think Dirge of Cerberus is better than people give it credit for. If I were to give it a place in this list, like I said, it's probably higher than you're expecting, but I think it goes here. I actually think it goes just below, it goes below 5, FF5, in C tier. It's a decent game. It has problems, which is why it's not solid. It's not amazing or anything. But it's not bad either. It's right down the middle. It has things going for it, and it makes for a very fun time. I think this is the most fun FF game you could play drunk or something for a drinking game. It's a very funny game. Anyway, let's move on. Water and water and water, water, water and water and water, water, water and water and water, water. This is FF8. So, FF8 I have some opinions on. Very mixed on this game overall, I think. Like 5, this is another game that I think you could put it in S tier or in F tier, and I wouldn't argue with you. Because it has a lot of things going for it, and it has a lot of things really against it. But first about the pros, I think Squall is one of the most interesting protagonists in Final Fantasy. I think Squall is amazingly written. His development feels natural, it feels great. Squall's characters, Laguna as well, Laguna and his crew. I think their crew is more interesting than the main actual party. Outside Squall, Laguna, Ward, and Kyros are very fun trio. They're very banterous, and I find them more enjoyable to follow along with. And this is because I'm gonna sneak in a con here while I'm still talking about the pros. I think the cast of FF8 are sadly not very good. And that's because all of the spotlight is given to Squall and the Laguna crew. Squall has such a huge spotlight in the story that I think everyone else suffers for it, because no one else really gets time to develop or anything. Like, a lot of these characters are cool at an initial glance, like how Zell is very ADHD coded. Actually, I hate Selphie, so never mind Selphie, but like Irvine's whole like thing of like being a sniper who's never killed anyone. I think FF8 has one of those top 3 best endings to a Final Fantasy game. Experience it for yourself if you want. It genuinely made me cry. I think it's that good. As well as that, I do think, as many problems as I have with it, the customization and complexity of like the whole GF stat system. By the way, GF is a very funny term to use in this game with modern knowledge of what people would refer to GF as. Hearing the phrase "you need to equip your GF" is will never get old. Yeah, the stat system, it makes for a very replayable game, I think, even if I really dislike it overall. And let's get into why. I think FF8 is kind of boring gameplay-wise, but more than that, it's one of the most grindy games in the series. Even with like a ×2 speed on it, it still drags a lot. You're just fighting enemies over and over and over again. Well, you're not even fighting them, actually. Correction, you're drawing from them. Aha! It's funny you mention that. It does have level scaling, but the grinding's not traditional in FF8. In Final Fantasy VIII, you have the draw system. So, let's say I'm against this like random enemy and they have Fira. I have to draw Fira from them. So then I draw from them and I get anywhere from like 1 to 9 Fira. That's how it works. It's orange. That's the RNG part, how many cards you get. Now, imagine doing that, but you have to do it enough to stack it up to 99, and then you have to do that for all 3 party members. That's the type of grinding you have to do. And then sometimes enemies will have multiple spells on them. And the reason you have to grind all these spells is because the spells you have determine how your stats get boosted and by how much. Because basically you attach spells to your stats. So let's say this Fira, right? Let's say I get 1 Fira, and I put it on my attack. I get a bit more attack. But then if I draw 99 Fira and get 99 Fira and put the stack of 99 Fira on my attack, I get way more. So, in this game, the grinding isn't killing enemies. It's drawing from enemies. You have to draw to boost your stats. Because here's the thing as well, even if you don't level, normal enemies will still be fine. But this game does have bosses, and some bosses will still require you to actually use the systems at hand. And for that to happen, you need to get 99 of several spells and attach them to your stats. Because otherwise, you're doomed. There are just parts of the game you cannot really get past without doing that. While I think it's cool in a way because it allows for some customization, it's a very tedious process and not very fun. Besides that, one thing I have a problem with FF8 is everyone everywhere is like super connected. Like everyone knows each other or has relations to each other in some way, or has heard of X person and Y person. Because of that, it makes the world it makes it feel way smaller than it actually is, and I'm not a big fan of that in a game that tries to really sell the world building and atmosphere of it all. Like FF7, like not everyone knows everyone. Like, you know, Cloud doesn't know Sid. You know, Barrett doesn't know Red 13. Sephiroth doesn't know he doesn't know how to snowboard. You know, it's like sometimes that sort of thing where like, oh, it's such a huge world, of course X person doesn't know about Y, is nice. But FF8 doesn't really have that. It's like everything is so connected to each other. It's really weird. It's almost like everyone was their neighbor, you know? But it's supposed to be a big world, so I don't know. It's a little thing for me. Besides that, the story overall does take a long while to become interesting, I think. It starts out as this, like, students doing missionary group stuff, and then going around, and then there's a mystery, and then you're going around the world, and something summons. It's kind of a blur to me at the beginning, because it's honestly just not that interesting. Yeah, and of course, as you can hear, FF8 has an amazing OST, there's a pro for it, but FF8 is going to be the first one in D tier. It's an okay game. It's another game, like I said, where you could put it in S tier or F tier, and I wouldn't argue with you, because I don't think I could see anyone rating it anything. It's just really not for me. Alright. Next up is Final Fantasy IX. Now, FF9 I don't actually have too much to talk about, surprisingly. But in a good way, because FF9 is overall a just really amazing game. So I don't have much to say about it. It's easier to say more negative than positive, I think. And there's only so much I can say about 9. 9 has a very strong storyline. I think it is entertaining story-wise from beginning to end. I don't remember being bored at the story at any point. I love that it's like a modernized classic FF. I love the sort of fantasy vibe it has going for it after FF7 and 8, which were much more modernized. And I know that's the point, because if I recall, 7, 8, and 9 were part of a project where it's like 7 is based on modern day, 8's based on the future, and then 9's based on the past, or something like that. But I really love that atmosphere of 9. As well as that, here's another FF game that made me cry in several different scenes. I won't go over why, because there are spoilers, but they're pretty good. Amazing OST again. I think the main villain is really interesting. He's not my favorite by any means, but there's a really good like plot twist with him and everything. And overall, the game's like fun throughout. As well as that smaller thing, but I am gonna say right here, this is like one of the few Final Fantasy games that doesn't make me hate Moogles. The only other one being Final Fantasy VI, because we have Mog, and Mog's a fun character, even if he's a bit underdeveloped for my taste. But yeah, no, Moogles in this game are cool. In most games, they are just like annoying little creatures that are just there to piss you off. In 9, I like how they are presented in the world. I like that they're like your record keepers for saving, and they get pissed off of you if you call them too many times without doing anything. I like the interactions you can have with Moogles where they're just done right, you know? They're assholes, but like in a fun way in this game, and I like that. I wish more games handled Moogles better. That's kind of it for the pros, but do keep in mind that those pros I just said are really big ones, actually. Like, I've basically just said the story and the characters and the soundtrack and the main villain and like almost the whole game is just really good. So like, let's talk about the cons. There's a few. First of all, the combat is just very sluggish. I don't think it's not fun. I think it's a perfectly fine JRPG, if not a bit basic, but it is a bit sluggish. It's quite slow paced. And the game overall is at quite a slow pace, which overall I didn't mind. But there are times when it's a bit more noticeable, like when you might have to grind, which, by the way, there is a grind near the end of the game, and like always, grinding's just not fun, so there's that. And grinding in a game that is this slow pace is also obviously not fun. Luckily, the one enemy you can kill over and over again for your grinding is, as long as you're lucky, very quick, but besides that, it's Besides that, the final dungeon is once again bad. Great in a story perspective, but in a gameplay perspective, a really bad final dungeon. Some of the bosses are very cruel and have really unfun gimmicks. Also, the last quarter of this game is definitely its weakest point. Like, the game's a 10 out of 10 for the most part, but the last quarter, they kind of rely on this big exposition dump just to kind of fill in the gaps that they otherwise hadn't before. And it's just not a fun way of doing that type of storytelling. I think there's other ways they could have done it, but either way, this game is amazing. There's a few issues, but overall it is up here with 6. I'm not gonna organize the S tier because I want to keep a mystery as what the favorite one is. I still debate it even now, actually. I might even change my opinion at the last second, but we'll find out. Anyway. Let's talk about Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy X is a video game. It's a good video game. It has a lot of problems, but it's good. The good outweighs the bad, I think, by a good bit. We will start with the pros, as always, and first and foremost, I think X has one of my favorite combat systems in Final Fantasy. Of the typical, like, JRPG ones, that is. Of the typical JRPG style that is Final Fantasy, I think X does it best. It's a very fun system. I really like how the limit breaks work. I think the sphere grid isn't that bad, actually. I like the customization of it all. I think it's good. I like the customization and like trying to like make your... Like, there's optimal routes, sure, but like you can do anything with anyone if you really, really want to, which makes the game a bit more replayable. Even if it's a bit like linear. I would normally say as a con. I mean, linearity isn't inherently a con in any game. In 10, I don't think it is, because I think the game has such amazing world building and like environmental storytelling that the linearity isn't so bad. It doesn't feel too bad. We will get to a game that does linearity bad later. You might be able to guess it now if you know Final Fantasy. But if you don't know, we'll find out sooner or later. Besides that, once again, amazing OST. I think 10 nails the characters. I think all of the party members are fantastic. Like, Tidus is an amazing protagonist. Yuna is really good. Auron is one of my favorite characters of all time. Wakka's really good. Even if he takes a while to get there, he does take some time, but he does develop, and it's really good growth. Really good character growth. And Riku is really good as well, and Kimahri is the weakest, but is still alright, actually. He's not amazing, but he's good. And this is the first time I can say, in a Final Fantasy party, there isn't a single character I like dislike or think is just mid. Also, Final Fantasy X has the I heard they're going to Macarena Temple. Macarena. The dub is so fucking funny. Let's get into that, actually. We're going to cons. The dubbing is mostly really good, but I do need to address that the direction for this game was very weird. And there is a reason for that. So Final Fantasy X, when they were developing the voice acting for this game, they, I believe, were instructed or were trying to match their lines to the mouth flaps, right? They were trying to match them perfectly, because they really wanted it to feel like immersive, and they wanted people to, you know. But there was an inherent problem with that, being that English is not Japanese. So there are some scenes that are actively ruined. For example, the two I think of inherently are Riku saying, "Uni will die, you know?" Which is like, it's in a really emotional moment, but the you know, just like, it's so weirdly placed. And the other one, which is more prominent, is in the final, what I'm gonna call the final boss fight. We're gonna talk about the final boss, don't worry. Where Tidus says, he's supposed to say, "I hate you," right? He says, "I hate you." But it's so fast and quickly delivered, you'd think it was a YouTube poop. He goes, it's really funny. Let's talk about the final boss while we're at it. We're not going into detail, but the final boss is actually, there are 3 final bosses, kind of, technically. You have the first final boss, who is amazing. I love that fight, it's really fun. Really creative as well. Then you have the second final boss, who is frustrating and annoying and not as fun. I actively screamed "fuck you" when I beat it. That should tell you how I felt about that fight. I guess you could say it's rewarding to beat it, but it's a very frustrating fight, let's just say. And then we have the third final boss, which is mostly narrative because it's extremely piss easy, which I believe it's the point of the fight, and story-wise is very clever, but it does feel very anticlimactic. I guess I'll talk about the worst thing about this game, the Cloister of Trials. The Cloister of Trials is a mandatory part of the game, where you do these like little puzzles with orbs, where you place them in the right place, and when they get put in the right place, they unlock doors or deactivate traps or move a platform or whatever, what have you, you know? But the problem is, none of them are fun. They're either too easy or too hard. The Cloister of Trials are not fun. They slow down the pace of the game. They get progressively worse with each one. But yeah, FF10. FF10 is... Where would I put FF10? I think FF10 is here. I think it's a solid game. I think it's a solid game. I don't think it's better than 4, but I think it's better than Crisis Core. Good story, good characters, but just has a few things kind of holding it back a little. I think if Cloister of Trials were removed, this would be up here, but they're not. And I think if a lot of those little cons, if some of those cons were fixed, this game would legit actually probably be up here even, but it's going to be down here for now. Now, I wonder where FF10-2 is gonna go. Final Fantasy X-2 is an interesting one. I've said this about all of them. I've just realized this. They're all interesting ones. But FF10-2 is... I've seen opinions on it on all sides of the scale. I've seen people say it is the worst thing ever made. I have seen people say it's better than FF10. Where do I think it is? Well, let me just say that I have 4 pros for this game and 11 cons. That's what I've got listed. So, yeah. So, first of all, you can hear this OST. This game has a very surprisingly funky soundtrack, and I really like that. It's got like a real early 2000s, 90s, 80s vibe, mixed with... It's very Charlie's Angels-esque, which is the point. Like, this game is very Charlie's Angels, like very... that sort of era of like of action TV and movies. It's very cheesy, but supposedly in a good way. And in some ways it does it well. In other ways, not so much. I think the class system is very cool in this game. It's very interesting. I like how you mix and match your classes to like kind of like make what you're currently on. You basically have like these grids where you can put so many classes on them. You can have a 3-dotted grid, so that means you get 3 classes, or you have one that has 10 dots, so you get 10 classes. And how this works is, as you switch, you can use your turn to switch your class, and if you switch to certain classes on the grid, you get a buff. And these buffs stack and like gradually get better as you go through the grid, so you're permitted to switch class a lot in fights, which is really cool in concept and really cool in boss fights, but it's not very good in normal battles. Because in normal battles, you kind of just want to punch the thing and kill it, but no, you're expected to change class. And to add to the con of that, the animation for changing class is a really long Sailor Moon-esque transformation, and you cannot skip it. Yeah, let's talk about this. So yeah, long transition time, slow combat, kind of designed around boss fights before anything else, which has its pros and cons. Pros being, of course, it's good for boss fights, and the boss fights in this game are good. So I will give credit where credit is due. The normal battles are slow and tedious and really suck. I also think the ATB system is one of the best in this game. Mostly. It's mostly a really good ATB system. But there is a major problem with it. The abilities in this game have really slow cast times and a really weird order priority. So stuff like white magic and black magic can take a long time to come out, but you're actually spent waiting longer for the move to come out when it's already fully charged, because the order priority places it right at the bottom. So what will happen is, let's say I have Yuna on white mage and I have her cast Cure on someone who's about to die. What happens is, she charges up her Cure, she charges it all the way up so the bar is full, and then what happens is the enemy attacks, then maybe Pain attacks, and then maybe Yuffie begins the charge animation for one of her spells, and then another enemy attacks, and then maybe Yuna can Cure. Maybe just then. It's not good. Really weird order priority. It means like you have to kind of constantly be healing if you're on white mage, because you can't reliably react to someone being low health, which is especially bad in a game where you're expected to change class all the time. So in some cases, you're better off just having someone on white mage and never switching classes so they miss out on all the buffs, just so you can keep your party alive, which is bad game design. Alongside that, I know I was talking about cons in the pros, but we do have one more pro, and that is, I do appreciate how Final Fantasy X-2 develops the world of Final Fantasy X. It's very clever. I do like how after the events of FF10, for example, Zanarkand becomes a tourist attraction. Like, that's really clever. That's really clever, actually. That's all the positives of FF10 too. Now into the negatives, and I've already talked about some of them because they were tied to the positives. So you know how Final Fantasy has a really bad track record for minigames? X-2 has no good minigames, and it is a game that is 50% minigames. I am not kidding. This game is half combat and like the cutscenes and such and typical JRPG stuff, and then it is half minigames. Just to give an idea of how bad the minigames are, I'm going to talk about the one that stuck out to me, which is the one rhythm minigame that plays. The one rhythm minigame is basically Yuna is preparing for a idol performance thing, where she's gonna sing to Sin, I think. I do not remember the details. FF10's story is weird and stupid, and it's hard to remember stuff. So you do this little rhythm game where you practice singing, and it's cute. Except here's the problem. This is a rhythm minigame with, one, no indication of what the rhythm is. There is a song, technically. It's not really tied to anything. Two, you have no indication of what you're actually supposed to press. The game doesn't tell you what buttons to press for this minigame. It just kind of assumes you can figure it out, which I thought I had. I thought it was the simple square, triangle, X, circle, but it might not be. It might have been weird inverted or something. I don't know what's going on. It's very weird. It might be a port issue, admittedly, but there's still other issues. As well as this 3, there is no indication of timing. You do not know what the timing of the button press is. Is it tight or is it loose? I don't know. I did not figure it out because you only play the minigame once and then you move on. Regardless if you did well or not, by the way. You just have to beat it to the bare minimum and then you just win. Even if that's a bad score you get or something. And lastly, you get no indication of whether your moves are actually successful or not. There's no, like, thing that says, perfect, good, great. There's nothing. You have no indication. You only have an indication if you've missed. You don't get an indication if you hit or how well you hit. Which is weird because the game will tell you after how well you did that. So, yeah, it's a really bad minigame. And a lot of these minigames are bad in this game. There's one that's like a massage minigame where Yuna just massages this random woman and she like really sexually moans and is kind of weird and gross. There's like a monkey catching minigame, which is just not fun. There is a run for the gate minigame with no indication of timing. There's so much and it's all bad. None of it is good. So because of that, 10-2 is joining the F Club. It is better than After Years at least, which is not much of praise, but at least 10-2 has more going for it in the fact that bosses are fun, kind of. Oh, and I didn't mention the final boss of this game sucks. It's not difficult. He is piss easy. He is the easiest fight in the game. It's kind of pathetic. This game has good OST for the most part, but the final boss music is pathetically weak and sounding. You might think that would be intentional, like it's supposed to give the idea, like Gwyn Lord of Cinder kind of thing, where it's like just tragic and not very impactful. But no, he's supposed to be a impactful boss. He's supposed to be like really important, but it's Anyway, let's talk about Final Fantasy XI. Let me explain my experience with Final Fantasy XI. So, I booted up Final Fantasy XI, and then I attempted to play Final Fantasy XI. But Final Fantasy XI had an error code. So I stopped playing Final Fantasy XI, because I never got to play Final Fantasy XI. But then, I had a moment of genius. Oh, I said. This is the solve to the error code. And so I booted up Final Fantasy XI. Except, I didn't boot up Final Fantasy XI, for there was a different error code. I found the solve yet again, and I booted up Final Fantasy XI. I was then greeted by the menu of Final Fantasy XI. Hooray! I exclaimed. After 4 hours, 4 grueling hours of going through error codes, I finally have made it into the game. But lo and behold, as I was updating the game, once again, I was plagued by yet another error code in Final Fantasy XI. And so I stopped playing Final Fantasy XI. Actually, no, I never played Final Fantasy XI. For my experience of the game was only the menus. Because this game does not work. And that is why it goes in the, I don't know, I couldn't get it to work. There. Now let's talk about Final Fantasy XII. Hello, time-traveling future K-Man here, with an update. Before starting Final Fantasy XII, I'm here to announce that I got Final Fantasy XI working, and I've even played a decent bit of it, so here's a little informal review. which is to say I'm not actually going to review much of it, I'm just going to say where it is in the tier list. It's an A tier, right at the bottom, very good game, I very much enjoy it, it's really clunky, and I've lost my motivation for it after several hours of grinding, but overall it's pretty good. Anyway, back to you, Past K-Man. Right, let's talk about Final Fantasy XII. This one, I have stuff to talk about, and a lot. This is a game I can only appreciate more and more of time. This is what I've been waiting for, this is what the whole video is about, it's just for 12 and maybe Tactics as well. So, first things foremost, the villains are actually underrated. The main villain, Vayne, is a very, like, political villain. It's interesting to have a villain who's essentially just a diplomat. If I remember right, he starts out as like, he's like a diplomat for a fascist state, and then he just kind of takes over it, and then becomes leader and stuff, and then typical villain stuff happens, but like, he's interesting. And a lot of the villains, like the judges, they're also tyrannical, but in an interesting way. I think this game has the single best atmosphere of any Final Fantasy. You really do feel like you're in a huge world with 12, you know? You're going around and there's this giant desert and there's all the scenery. You see like the sandstorm come in and all the monsters adapt to the situation. Some of them go into hiding and stuff. And then you go to like the southern plains and you can see where like the sand kind of trickles in, but then it becomes a plain with grassy fields. And then how the atmosphere changes when it's raining. And it's just, oh, this game has some of the best atmosphere in any Final Fantasy, any JRPG, honestly. For the record, really beautiful game. This game looks like it was a PS3 game, but it's PS2. So, really huge credit there. The style of this game has aged, like, perfectly. I do not think this game will ever look bad. It's really ageless look to it. 12 also, I think, has some of the most fun gameplay in the series. I think this is more of a controversial point, because some people really don't like the gameplay in 12. I love the gameplay. It's basically ATB system, but you can freely move around. It's more like an MMORPG, which is, you can probably guess why 14 is based off 12. It's like a mixture of FF11 and FF14, smushed in the middle with the ATB gauge. Because you have the ATB gauge as normal, but whenever you want to like do a specific move, you essentially pulls the game to go into your menu. So it has a stock system, but everything's active outside of choosing what you want to do. And besides that, there's then the Gambit system, which is basically like computer coding for babies, where you choose like the priority order of what moves you do and when you do them. So for example, you can have a Gambit set up, where your healer character has, when ally health less than 40%, cast Curaga. And then instead of doing whatever they're going to do, if the Gambit's on, they will do that. And you can set up to like 12 Gambits or something per character. So it's a really fun system. It really gets the creative juices flowing. You can do some really cool combos with it. Also, one of the best class systems in Final Fantasy. Everyone multi-classes in the sense of everyone gets 2 classes. It's not like a main class and subclass like it's D&D or something. They're both like equally main classes. Essentially you have like a wheel and there's loads of infinite combinations, so it makes the game really replayable. You can essentially do any combination with any character and make them into whatever you want. Like some characters have better stat growths in areas, like Bolthir is always going to be your physical attacker normally, because he just has insane attack growth. And like Pinello is always going to be your white mage because she has insane magic growth. But you don't have to go that route if you want. You can do it the opposite way around and get by fine. Because the class choices are more important than the stat growth. It's just that if you want to be optimal, you can do it a certain way. As well as this, there is grinding in this game, but it's not as tedious as other FF games. Because 12 is not a game where you encounter an enemy, you wait for the combat to start, and then you go into JRPG mode, and then you go through the victory screen. Basically, because it's like an MMORPG in a sense, you just kind of kill enemy, move on, you know? It's all within one area, no loading times. So it's much faster, and because there's a turbo mode as well in Zodiac Age, which is nice. So grinding's not too bad. I would prefer if there was no grinding, obviously, but it not being as tedious as some of the previous ones is, you know, chef's kiss. All the guest characters are great. They're amazing additions to the roster. They may have good dynamics with the characters. Also, this game has the second best Gilgamesh fight in the entire series. I wonder if anyone can guess what the best Gilgamesh fight is. Interesting fact, it's the same game that has the best ending in Final Fantasy. Tied best ending that I mentioned earlier. But yeah, Gilgamesh, second best Gilgamesh fight in the game. Really fun fight. Most of the bosses in this game are really creative and fun, and they all have really cool gimmicks. Like there's one that means you can't attack. There's one that doesn't let you use items. There's one that doesn't let you use white magic and that doesn't let you use magic. There's one that puts doom on you and you have to kill it before you get doomed to death. All simple ideas, but executed perfectly for the most part. Some are better than others. There's one boss fight that poisons you, and you cannot remove the poison until you beat it, and that one's not very fun. Let's get into cons, but before, this one's a neutral point, because it's a pro and a con. So, out of your party of 6, 3 of them are really good. Balthier, Bosch, and Ashe are 3 of the best Final Fantasy characters in the whole franchise, I think. They are really amazing. Balthier is probably my favorite Final Fantasy character of all time. Bosch is way up there as well, and Ashe is probably one of the best female Final Fantasy characters of all time as well. She's no Tifa, but she's pretty good actually. I really like her. But then there's the other 3 party members. Fran is decent. She has a lot of story. I love her character. She kind of gets sidelined in a few parts of the game though, because she doesn't offer much to this main story. But then you have Vaan and Penelo. And this is the sad part, because Vaan is introduced in this game to be the main character. He is the character you start off with besides the tutorial level, where you play his dead brother, Rex. Vaan is a sad story because Vaan starts off as the main character, and then the moment Balthier shows up, he is no longer the main character. He just gets sidelined by Balthier and Fran, and then the moment the whole party is full, Vaan no longer serves a purpose. He exists to be there for the ride, and he is no longer the focus of the attention. He might be in cutscenes sometimes, but he doesn't serve much of a purpose, and it's a shame, because he only needed like a few more cutscenes of development and growth to really showcase it, how the journey's affecting him or something, or how he's becoming more mature. But he's missing a lot of those in-betweens. And then Penelo is basically just a cardboard cutout of a character. She doesn't exist. She's in the beginning of the game as Vaan's childhood friend, and basically like the person who keeps him on a leash all the time. And then when everyone gets together, Penelo just kind of joins along to... Well, Penelo gets kidnapped, and then she joins along, and then she's just with you. And then you're just kind of stuck with her because you need a 6th party member, I guess. So it's a shame because 4 of these party members are really good characters, and then 2 of them are just nothing burgers. Besides that, there's a few things. The story overall is mostly pretty good, but when you look at it from a certain lens, it kind of just feels like Star Wars Part 4. Actually, it really is just Star Wars Part 4, but if it was Final Fantasy. If you ever play the game, you might know what I mean in a sense. It does have more going for it, luckily. There is like a lot of Ivalice lore, which is the world that 12 is based in. And other games will add more to that, luckily. But sadly, the game does feel a bit uninspired in parts. Besides that, 12 has a bunch of side quests with really weird requirements that are really tedious and boring. For example, there's a side quest in this game where you must wait 5 minutes standing still in a specific spot for an enemy to spawn, and then you have to defeat the enemy. And then you beat the side quest. And there's a lot of little weird things like that. Weird requirements to get to Esper boss fight, or to get certain treasures and treasure and stuff, and it's weird. But 12 joins the Peak crew. 12 is a really good game. It's the Final Fantasy I hold closest to my heart. It's nearest and dearest to me in a nostalgia sense. But there are other games that come close to being just as good at it, if not better. Like, you know, these 2 are 2 of them, and we do have 2 others that will be up here. So we'll get to those when we get to those. Now it's time for the other game in the series I dropped. This is Final Fantasy XII Revenant Wings. Not many people know this game exists, and I can't blame them, because I didn't know it existed, and I'm a 12 fan. I didn't beat this game, I dropped it, but I did watch the rest of the story at least, so I know what opinions I have on it overall. And I do have equally listed pros and cons, but this game is very much down there. So let's talk about the pros. First of all, genuinely interesting characters. The new characters are all really good additions. I love Kites. He's a character that came from 12 but was a minor character. And I can't remember what her name was, but the other new girl was really good as well. And the new Dragoon guy, I'm also forgetting the name of, but he was a fun character. He was a typical Dragoon, edgy type, but like fun. And Vaan and Penelo, this is where the development went. It's a shame it was in this game, but I am really happy that at least some form of like media gave Vaan and Penelo a chance to shine. And in this story, they really shine. I really love Revenant Wings' story. It's not amazing, but it makes for good character growth for Vaan and Penelo as they deal with being like professional, like actual like sky pirates, which is what Vaan always wanted to be, and Penelo joined him. And there's like a bit of romance, which was always teased in the original game, but like it's confirmed in this one. And I really like that they put a seal on that too. They like confirm that that's how it is. It's a really sweet story, but the cons are really huge. Mainly, the biggest deal is the game. This is the equivalent to the kind of TRPG you would find in a bargain bin for like 99p. Revenant Wings is not fun. Gameplay-wise, the actual least fun game here. Which is saying a lot because After Years is on here. Because the thing is, After Years is still just a basic JRPG. It just suffers from a bad, like, system. And the game is insanely difficult while also being the slowest pacing. And it is not fun. Also to mention, the mission difficulty overall is really inconsistent. Some levels you will clear through in seconds because they're so easy, and then others you will die over and over and over to again for no real reason besides bad enemy placement or something. Last con as well, but this game has sneaking missions, and sneaking missions do not function in this game at all. Basically, enemies' line of sight is way too huge, and in your sneaking missions you typically only play as Vaan, who has a sprint on a cooldown, which doesn't travel very fast. And there are too many enemies to get past, and it is just not fun, and it is bad. The only thing saving this from being lower than After Years is the fact that its story and characters are really good, and it appeals to me personally as an Ivalice fan in that sense. So, it goes here. Revenant Wings is just above After Years, but is really low down. We are now on to... Hope you're enjoying the nightmares of Ivalice raids once again. But yes, we are here at Final Fantasy Tactics. Oh god, this game. I do not have many notes on this game, but that is a good thing, again. This game has, without a doubt, the single most fun gameplay in all of this series. In all of Final Fantasy. I know it's a different type of game. It is not a JRPG. It is a Fire Emblem-like, it's like a TRPG. But it is peak. This game is the single most fun game in the whole franchise, bar none. I have no doubts about it. As well as that, every single character is written amazingly. All of the relevant characters are perfect. The main villain is amazing. All of the villains are amazing, actually. All of the main characters are amazing. The character development and growth is perfect. The story is one of the most engaging in the series. It is actually peak. I cannot recommend it enough. The class system is the single most fun in all of FF. 12 being second most, but this one is the single most fun class system in the series. And having all like custom characters and stuff is really fun too. Like, and I'm talking about the version that's not even War of the Lions, because I heard War of the Lions is like a remake of the remaster of this game. I didn't even play that. I played the original, and I'm talking about the original, which has one of the cons being lack of quality of life, which I think some of my issues were fixed in War of the Lions. So one quality of life example that's really bad in Tactics is that there's no restart level. But yeah, ton of pros for this game. Like, checks all around the board. Only other cons I have are that status ailments are kind of like especially frustrating in this game. And the beginning of the game's really cruel to new players. This is a very difficult game. I think most of the difficulty's fun. It's a challenging but rewarding kind of difficult, not a pure frustrating one. But some of those first few missions are kind of frustrating because of not knowing the game yet, and the game just kind of throws you in there. But besides that, some levels kind of require specific class changes. There's no way you can really know that beforehand. Like, there's just some missions that are really difficult to beat without certain class changes. And there's no real way for you to know that, especially because you would have to like grind these classes. Admittedly, grinding classes I didn't find too bad in this game. It felt very natural, but sometimes you would go back and forth and do random encounters. But the gameplay was fun, so I didn't mind it. But with Tactics done, that straight up in peak. No question about it. And with that, we move on to a new series of games. This was supposed to be like a big thing. The Fabula Nova Crystallis, also known as the XIII franchise. This is the series, the 4 games of the XIII series, the Fabula Nova Crystallis, which are all set in the same universe, being FF13, 13-2, Lightning Returns, and Type 0. So we'll go about them in that order. Let's start with Final Fantasy XIII. You might be able to tell, my first pro of FF13 is the OST slaps. This is one of the best in the whole series. 13's soundtrack is fantastic. I know it's an obvious statement to call a Final Fantasy game's OST good, but this one deserves a special amount of praise. 13's soundtrack is perfect. I do not say it lightly. It's one of my favorite soundtracks in the whole series. This game, 13's a difficult one to rate, really. Every opinion besides the OST, I have mixed feelings on. Like, I have both pros and cons about everything. Like, the characters, for example. This character has a mixture of some of my most and least favorite characters in all of FF. Lightning is an okay protagonist. I think she's really good in this game. She has a really good dynamic with Hope, I think. I love their, like, brotherly, sisterly kind of relationship. It's really cute, especially considering the kind of stoic character Lightning is, where she's like, oh, I don't trust anyone, I'm cool and badass and edgelord kind of thing, but no, she's fun, she's good. Hope is fine. He's written like a teenager, which is the good thing. People hate Hope for the wrong reasons, because Hope is a teenager who dealt with his mother's death and just had to kind of like do a bunch of crazy shit right after with no chance of stopping. So of course he's like stressed out as shit and like saying really insane things and like doing kind of dumb things because he's a teenager and he is traumatized. He makes sense to be written the way he is. He does have issues. I think his main issues come from the fact that his growth takes too long to get to the point it's at. And this is a common problem with the game. Everything takes too long. Everything from story to characters to gameplay. The story takes too long to really get engaging. The characters take too long for their development for the most part. And the gameplay takes too long to get good. Back to the characters. Saz is one of my favorite Final Fantasy characters like ever. He is an amazing character. He has like my second favorite scene in all Final Fantasy. He has some of my most favorite growth and development as a character in this game. I love his dynamics with everyone. I love his dynamic with Lightning especially. Sadly, though, by the end of the game, when Saz's story is done, he just becomes comedic relief. And it's kind of a shame, because I really like the serious side of him. Snow is fine, generic meathead guy. He has really good development. He has really good growth as a character, but he's just fine. Fang is also really good. I love Fang. She's a really good character. I don't have much to say about her, though, because it's kind of all spoilery, her deal. And then Vanille is one of my least favorite characters in all of FF. I don't like her at all. And I can't really get into why without spoilers a lot, but I really don't like a lot of the choices she makes. Some of it could be justified as, like, her being a dumb teenager thing, but I think it's less acceptable in her case for considering how many things she's done and how she's done them and what she does, compared to Hope, who has literally just witnessed his mother dying and everything he does mostly makes sense. Like I said, with all things, the game takes too long to get good. The gameplay's not really fun until you get to the latter, like, third of the game, when you have all the party together. But just for an example of how bad the pacing of this game is, you have tutorials in this game all the way up till chapter 9. This game has 13 chapters, and the tutorial teaches you to change the party leader. Not only is the last tutorial in chapter 9, but you can't change your party leader until chapter 9. And even then, it's limited because some of your characters are not available to become party leader at this point. If I remember right, I think it's Saz and Hope can't become party leader in this part of the game. They can join your party, but they can't be party leader. Why? No reason, I guess. I'm salty as this, as someone who uses Saz as my main character, because Saz is the most fun to play, but if I'm talking about 13, I do have to talk about the linearity, because this is the point that every single game critic panned this game for when it came out. That, oh, it's too linear, it's not like our open world FFs, but these are the same people who probably praised FF10, which is also linear. But, here's the thing. Linearity is not the issue of this game. I know. Shocking. The problem is not because it's a corridor game. The problem is because it's a corridor game that feels lifeless and bland. All the areas you go through, there's no interesting buildings to explore. There's no NPCs. There's no landscapes, really. There's no proper shops besides, like, these little robot things. And even though I really don't like minigames in FF, the fact that there is no minigames along the way just add to the fact of how empty and lifeless it all is. Now, part of it could be the point, because in 13 you are playing a bunch of refugees who are on the run, so of course they're not going to meet people, right? But there's a lot of situations where they're in areas where other people are there, but it still feels lifeless. It still feels like no one's really around, or like these people are faceless nothings, you know? It doesn't feel lived in. The world doesn't feel lived in. And it's a big problem when you have a corridor game. I think if it was open world, but kept this sort of lifeless energy, it might have sold it better. It might have sold the sort of vibe they were going for. But because they made it a corridor game with nothing to distract you from the fact that it's a corridor game, it suffers. And that's why people notice the linearity. It's not like Final Fantasy X, where the environments are bustling with life, and you can see all the little details. You see landscapes, and there's like mini games on the way, even if they're bad. It's nothing in 13. Even the open area you eventually get is also just a plain field with like a few like monsters randomly placed in it, and it, like, early parts of it feel like interesting. Also, enemy placements and levels are just kind of weird. There's a lot of levels where you're expected to fight like 5 different groups of enemies instead of being given the option to kind of sneak past any of them. They're just kind of placed in such a way that you can't avoid any random encounters. With all that in mind, where do I think 13 goes? Because there are things I like about 13, but there's a lot of problems too. I think 13 is above 8. And weirdly enough, I think what does it for me is, while 8 has the better story, I think the characters I like of 13 and the insane soundtrack and the because here's another thing I didn't mention. The gameplay is especially fun when it's a boss fight. It has the 10-2 problem, which is the game feels like it was designed around boss fights. Because random encounters are slow and boring. They're faster in a lot of these other games, but they still kind of feel a bit sluggish and kind of boring. Whereas boss fights are really interesting. They're like some of the most fun in the whole series, actually. 13 has some of the best boss fights in the whole series. Sadly, everything's inconsistent about this game. That's how I describe 13. It's inconsistent. Nothing is just good or just bad besides the OST. There's always a condition. The gameplay is good against bosses. The party is good. Well, half of them. The story is good. Kinda. Half. You know, it's like nothing is set in stone. It's fine. But I think it's above 8 because I think the difference is, at least with 13 I had fun playing it at parts. 8 I didn't really have fun playing it. I just really enjoyed the story and Squall. We're on the home stretch right now. Look how little we got left. We just got the rest of the Fabula Nova Crystallis. That's it. FNC. We got Nova Crystallis and then 14 and then just 15. Sorry, Strangers of Paradise. I'm gonna have to put you in this tier, which I'm gonna call probably the best game here, but didn't play it. Sad face. I'm so sorry I didn't get around to playing it. I think the main problem was the fact that not only did 14 burn me out before I could reach that point, but also I've heard the PC port's just unplayable, which means I don't have a real accessible way to play it, unless if that PC port is somehow usable. One day though. One day. I do want to play this game for real. I'm sure it'll end up here, but... anyway. 13-2. First of all, I think 13.2 has some of the best world building and environments in the series. Definitely better than 13. A lot of the areas either feel really lived in or completely dead, because this is a time travel game. You travel to different times. There is a time like when humans are basically going extinct, and there is a time which is the modern day. And there's all the times in between. And I love all the environments in this game. They're really great. And despite all the faults I have with this game, the gameplay is much more fun than 13. I think 13 is better at boss fights overall, but 13.2 overall makes normal combat better. And that is a huge deal, because the thing with 13 is normal combat was kind of a slog. So I was that the OST for this game slaps really hard. They, for some of the boss fights, some of the music, they got the singer from Devil May Cry 3, and you can really tell. Maybe I should play the Devil May Cry 3 13.2 song. Limit Break, that's it. Let's go, I'm gonna go play Limit Break, hang on. This is just a Devil May Cry song! Anyway, now we're gonna talk about the negatives of this game. I will also mention, yes, 13 does better boss fights. This game still has good boss fights, I will mention. But the cons. 13.2 has really tedious grinding. It changed the system from 13, where you basically put points into what classes you want to level, and then those classes gain bonuses as you level them, and there's an optimal way to do it. There is a monster system in this game where your third-party member is a monster, and you have to like feed them this food, and it's really expensive in both a cost sense and also a how limited you are in finding them kind of sense. So limited resource for leveling up monsters, and the thing is, it is selective, which like you have to really be careful what you give like your monster food to, because otherwise you're wasting it. Because you could waste it on a bad monster, and then uh-oh. Most of the characters, the original ones, are uninteresting and bland in this game. The main villain sucks ass. Sarah has the personality of a wet noodle, and Noel is fine. He is just okay. Real milquetoast 5 out of 10 character. He gets some better moments in Lightning Returns, actually. In this game, he is just okay. The story is stupid, and unlike Dirge of Cerberus, it is in a negative way. For example, this is something I wrote in the midst of my anger at trying to understand this game. Why is it being revealed that the time nonsense is because of a goddess saving the original party's lives at the end of the game? It was already established that what they did had a chance to save them. Why is there another unnecessary layer? To explain this, I'm not going to spoil the end of FF13, but what I will say in the end of FF13 is 2 characters sacrifice themselves for the sake of everyone else, and then the world is fine. But in 13.2, they use a lazy writing trick called rewriting the timeline. Now, you can do time travel stories well if you're smart and clever and good at writing, and not Final Fantasy 13.2. But Final Fantasy 13.2 does not do it well. Final Fantasy 13.2 uses it as a way to essentially retcon what originally happened for the sake of making a new story. And it doesn't do it well. As well as that, Monster Collection in itself is not very fun. I mentioned they're not fun to level up anyway, but they're also not fun to collect, really. The story has awful pacing, regardless of how just okay it is. Like, it starts okay, and then it just kind of meanders for a bit, and then the late game's fine. It's got interesting parts, but it's okay. Really bad pacing though. There's a lot of unnecessary padding in this game. Paradigm system is actually hindered by the monster system. To explain, FF13's paradigm system is basically every character has like 3 classes, right? And you switch between them in game by setting up paradigm sets. So let's say in FF13 you have a party of Lightning, Saz, and Snow. You might have Commando, Triple Commando, and that's one of your sets. And then another you might have Commando, Sentinel. Sentinel being the tank, Commando's the physical damage. So you then have a set for that. And you switch between your sets, you have like 6 sets. But the thing is, in this game, monsters only have 1 paradigm set to them. They're either a medic, or a sentinel, or commando, or ravager, or whatever. So you have to collect specific monsters that fit the paradigm, but it's hard to tell what's good and what's not. Like, you don't know if you got a good medic or a bad commando. the game's not very good at giving that information until you sunk too much like cost into them. At which point, well, now you're stuck with them. So, bad. Oh, also I mentioned once again another FF game that fails minigames. The minigames in this game suck. But more than anything, 13.2. All I thought by the end of it is this game has no reason to exist. It feels like it has zero reason to exist. 13 had a good ending, and I think it should have ended at 13, but it didn't. So we got more, and what we got sucked. And that is why 13.2, I think, goes in tolerable. I don't think it's bad outright. I think what it is it's a very experimental game that tried too hard to like be this hype follow-up, and it failed drastically. It still has fun gameplay to an extent, but it's like meandered with a billion problems, and it's a shame because it could have been really good. We are now at Lightning Returns, a game that very few people have actually ever played. Lightning Returns is not a good game. I will say outright I don't think it's a good game. I have heard people who have liked Lightning Returns. I am not one of those people. If anyone were to rate this game higher than me, I don't think I would argue with them to an extent. I think, like, I could see someone rating this like a 7 out of 10 or something, and I'd be like, yeah, you do you. Anything above that, and I might have a few, problems. I might not really agree, but, like, I wouldn't understand. So let's go into why. As you can hear, the OST is really good, as always. It's not really anything I have to bring up. At this point, I'm only going to bring up the OST if it's either especially good or bad. But we're at this point already. I can say now, nothing here has a bad OST. The closest thing to a bad OST in this game is either Revenant Wings or After Years. Hashtag After Years Sweep. But that's only because they are just... the only good songs they have are songs from, like, the games they are based off of. Lightning Returns. So I can start with one thing. The boss fights are mostly really fun. This is yet another game that feels like it was designed around the boss fights, more than the regular encounters. Because most regular encounters are either a stomp or drag on for way too long. Not too long, because encounters in this game are really fast, actually. This game plays really fast. It's an action game, kind of. This game has a lot of cute fan service for the FF series. You can tell, like, the people who made this game, like, really love Final Fantasy, which it's nice to see. You know, stuff like the street performer playing Battle on the Big Bridge on kazoo, or like all the little references and like posters and like signs and like stuff like that referencing other games. It's cute, you know. There's a lot of like cute things in this game. I like that. As well as that, while we'll get into the story, I think that the one thing this game does well writing-wise is it really gives amazing conclusions to a lot of FF13 and 32 characters. The main ones I think of are Null and Snow. Null is like, he is one of the first characters from a previous game that you meet. And I love what they did with his development. I don't think anyone here watching will probably play Lightning Returns, but I'm not going to spoil it either way. Because I think it's really good, and I respect the writers enough that I think I don't want to spoil what they've done with Null in 13.2. He has really good development, and it makes sense for him. As well as that, Snow is perfectly dealt with in this game. I think Snow's development in this game makes perfect sense. I love how he's implied to be like this villain, but in the beginning section of the game, that's not a spoiler, don't worry. I love why he is the way he is. I love how it resolves. It's just amazing. I really wish I could say more stuff like this about the rest of the game though, and the rest of the story. So that is why we're gonna talk about the cons. So 13 didn't really have this problem, because Lightning as a character was already kind of like this badass, right? I thought she was naturally kind of a badass. She was no Cloud or Squall. I think they were trying too hard originally to make her like Cloud or Squall, but she has the other layers to her that I think are really cool, and she has good growth in 13. But in Lightning Returns, it feels like they're trying way too hard to make her badass, but in a negative way. For example, I compare it to Dirge of Cerberus, where Dirge of Cerberus has that cheesy early 2000s aspect to it that makes it funny, whereas Lightning Returns has this 2010 intense edginess, which you'd think would have the same, like, value of, like, ironic enjoyment, but for me it doesn't. It kind of just comes off as a bit cringy. Maybe it's an era thing, maybe it would be funnier if I played this in 10 years, but as it stands, she doesn't really come across as a badass, and it feels like they're trying too hard with it. And it's a shame too, because I really like Lightning in 13, but in Lightning Returns I just don't like how she's handled. It's written like she was the main character the whole time, when in 13 it was an equal party situation where everyone was the main character. But she's treated like the main character, which I guess makes sense. She's on all the box art of like 13 and 32 and Lightning Returns, but like, I don't know, she has all this like extra importance on her above any other character, which I never understood why they went with that direction in 13 anyway, because everyone had really good development in that game, and honestly some characters were more interesting than her. And then in 13 they had different protagonists. Yeah, in that game she was upgraded to like god status, and then here she's upgraded to like, she's like angel sort of status almost. It's like, I don't get it. I don't know why she was chosen specifically, it's weird. Anyway, the gameplay outside of bosses is incredibly unfun and tedious. Again, like I said, it feels like the game was designed around bosses over normal fights. One thing I've noticed, this game has the Aini problem. I know Aini has a lot of problems, but like, this is the main one. The trying to have its cake and eat it too situation, where this game is trying to appeal to both new players and existing fans of the Babylon Nova Crystallis. I understand why they might appeal to new players, because they were like trying to make Lightning Returns its own thing, but it doesn't work as its own thing because it's very much a clear continuation of 13 and 13-2. So I don't know why they tried that. As well as that, there's a character who joins Lightning called Lumina, who's like this kind of villain question mark, and she is just an exposition machine and incredibly uninteresting, and her twist, it literally makes zero sense. I won't explain her twist because I'm trying to keep things spoiler-free as much as possible, but it is a bad twist, it sucks, it makes no sense, and it is just stupid. What you think about it for a second and it's dumb. Side missions in a lot of these games are kind of boring, but they're normally nothing of note because they don't take up too much time. In Lightning Returns, side missions are like 80% of the game. You spend a lot of time doing them. I mean, Lightning Returns is a game on a time limit. You have 13 days, funny that, to basically complete all the main story missions and then fight the final boss before like the world gets destroyed or whatever. The side missions have to make up for the time that you're not doing main story stuff, because main story stuff is either time locked or you've already beaten it and you still have a bunch of the day left. And most of it is really boring. Also, this game just has a case of really bad voice acting. I don't know what's going on. I think the direction might have been really bad, or maybe they just hired some talented people. I don't know what's going on. Lightning's voiced fine, but like the characters we know are voiced fine, but like a lot of characters just have really weird delivery on stuff, more so than 10. So this game would have had an extra point on top of what I was gonna give it originally. It was going to be like here. I was gonna say it'd be about here, above 13-2, below 13 and 8, but it actually goes here. Because of one thing, the final boss. The final boss in Lightning Returns is stupid on an insane number of levels, but mostly in terms of gameplay and really dumb execution. Lightning Returns is not a game that requires grinding per se, more so you just kind of grind out of necessity because you can't do anything else. So, you know, that happens. But the final boss is so incredibly difficult, to an extent it's not funny, that it actively made me, like, give up. And if I recall, I remember this is the one time in this whole playthrough of FF where I actually just opened up, like, one of those, like, game modder things and just leveled myself up. And even then, it was too difficult. Maybe I'm just bad, but it feels like this game, that final boss requires way too much perfect execution. It expects you to figure out way too much. And the worst thing is if you lose to this final boss, assuming you haven't saved beforehand, of course, which, I mean, I would hope you have. If you lose to this final boss, the game resets back to day 1 in this 13-day game, but not as New Game Plus. No, reset back to 0. If it was as New Game Plus, I think that would be cool, because then it's like, oh, you're getting stronger each time, and then eventually, after you beat the game enough times, you are strong enough to beat the boss. That would be cool. And then also, if it's New Game Plus, like maybe some of those like story missions you did and stuff are like already beaten, so you don't have to like, you can just like skip days or something. But nope, it's not as New Game Plus. So you either have to beat the boss there and then, or replay the game from the beginning. And that is just bad game design. Time for the last of the Nova Crystallis. And what I would argue is the best part of the Nova Crystallis. I think Type 0 is a good game, actually. It has problems, but it's a good game. Firstly, I think Type 0 has the second best introduction to a Final Fantasy game, right behind 6. Well, actually, third best, because 7 exists as well. It starts the game with an extremely realistic and brutal death of a character you don't know, but the main character knows. And it's really gripping. It gets you in the mood to play the game straight away. As well as that, this game is the one I mentioned earlier. This game has the single tied best ending to a Final Fantasy game. It is not the true ending though, which I will also talk about later, but the normal ending. The normal ending is actually amazing. It is insanely sad, but really well made. I'm not spoiling a thing of it. If you want to see it for yourself, you're welcome to, but I would recommend playing Type 0 and experiencing it yourself. As well as this, Type 0 actually has what I would consider my favorite boss fight in all of Final Fantasy, which is this game's Gilgamesh fight, which is incredibly fun. I have not had more fun with a boss fight than I have with that Gilgamesh fight, and that's saying a lot because my second favorite boss fight in Final Fantasy is the 12th Gilgamesh fight. They seem to have a habit of making Gilgamesh fun in these games. Really fun boss fight as well. And most of the bosses are pretty fun, actually, besides one I can think of. As well as this, the lore itself is incredibly interesting, and the story is overall pretty decent, but there is a problem. The lore is interesting, the story is decent, but what's the problem? The problem is, this game has a serious issue with tell, don't show. This game loves to just wax philosophical, or to just like speak at you about what is happening when and where, sometimes what is happening, not always, and just basically giving you a history lesson, and it is incredibly boring exposition. Type 0 is not good at storytelling. It has good moments, but is not a good storyteller. It has all of this interesting story hidden deep beneath, but it doesn't know how to tell it, and that is the saddest part about Type 0. Oh, also, I will make note of this. Type 0 has one of the few good final dungeons in Final Fantasy. I can't believe I'm saying that. We finally got there. After all this time, we got a good final dungeon. A lot of these final dungeons were either nothing of note because they're just okay, or they're bad, and I didn't feel like mentioning it. This is the first actively good one, in my opinion. I think the final dungeon in Type 0 is genuinely fun. I think there's one really annoying puzzle in it, and one annoying boss fight. But that's it. Besides that, really fun. I guess that's all for the pros. For the cons, the game's kind of clunky, honestly. Feels very clunky to play, especially depending on which character you're playing as. Because the thing with this game is, this is a game where you play as a whole class of student. Whenever one dies, they get replaced with another. So you go through characters like dropping like flies, and as long as you make it through the mission with enough with anyone alive, then you win. Typically speaking, you don't want anyone to die, especially for your score and stuff, so that stays as high as possible. But the thing with the gameplay of Type 0 is different characters feel either really good or really bad to play. For example, there's a character, I think his name is actually Jack. Jack in Type 0 is a samurai, and his whole deal is he doesn't have like a run, but he has a really good like dash button. Because remember, this is an action RPG, this game. He moves really slowly, besides dashing, but he also can like one-shot enemies, So he's like vital to play as because he's really good, but he's also really clunky. But then you have characters like King, who is a gunslinger type character, and he's really fun to play and feels like consistent to play because you just move around. You move around at a consistent pace. You're firing bullets. You can run when you want. He has a really good roll. Like he can like do dodges while he's firing, like bullet time stuff. So depending on who you're playing as, you either have really fun time or really bad time. As well as this, the game is incredibly hard. It's incredibly hard at first, but the thing is, it's a very convoluted battle system, and the game doesn't do a very good job explaining it to you. So you have to kind of figure stuff out. It's definitely the least hand-holdy game in the franchise, I want to say. As well as this, mentioning like how the cast are huge. Because of that, a lot of characters just get little to no time on screen and are just not relevant. I think the only relevant story characters are Ace, Rem, Machina, and King, and everyone else just kind of gets sidelined, which is a shame because there's some cool characters in there, but they just get no time. They get no time to really like become characters. They're just archetypes, which is a shame. In spite of that, the ending isn't soured by it, but like some moments are. So, as well as this, the game just has a really bad deal with how it expects you to play. Type 0 expects you to beat it like 2 or 3 times before you get the true ending, but it's kind of a long game. I spent like 30 hours on Type 0, I think. Maybe even more than that, just on my first playthrough. Now, you would get New Game Plus, yes, but because of how the game works, it doesn't really speed anything up, I don't think. Not by a significant margin. So, you'd be going for another 30 hours, even 60, just to get the true ending, and it's just... that game is not worth it, I'm gonna be real. It's a fun game, but not a replayable game, I want to say. And because of all that, I think Type 0 is... decent. I think it's at the top of decent. In fact, I'm gonna adjust some things, actually. I'm gonna put Type 0 up here. Alright, Type 0 is solid, and I think 13.2 might be flawed instead of tolerable. Alright, I'm gonna leave it there. I'm gonna leave it like that. We can adjust that at the end. FF14 fans, it's time. We are now talking about Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn. Oh boy, do I have opinions about A Realm Reborn. Whew, boy. So, A Realm Reborn, it's one I've got an interesting opinion on now because I've replayed it, and I can only say that about this and Heavensward right now, because Stormblood, Shadowbringers, and Endwalker, I have not got to replay yet. So, what do I think of A Realm Reborn? First of all, I think A Realm Reborn has some of the best world building and, like, has some of the most immersive experience in the whole of 14. I think how the world is set up to you, and when you first get that amazing feeling of exploring this huge world, I think nothing else in this game compares to how base 14 does it. The initial experience of stepping out into the world to Limsa, Gridania, or wherever. I really think nothing compares to that. It's an amazing world. I love what's set up. As well as that, while I have problems with the story of A Realm Reborn, I do love how a lot of things are set up for later on. A Realm Reborn really was the puzzle pieces, were really the puzzle pieces set like in motion to make the full puzzle complete by the end of Endwalker. That's not a good analogy, but I am also tired. As well as that, the music is really good. I'm making a note of this because I think as the expansions go on, the music gets better and better. For the most part, I mean, some of my favorite songs are from Stormblood, but A Realm Reborn still has really good music. And as well as this, I think the ending to ARR, not post-game, but the actual base ending to ARR, as much as it's memed on with Praetorium and everything around Gaius, I think it's a really good ending. I think the latter part of A Realm Reborn is amazing. Actually, I think it's really good. And so is the beginning. I think it's the middle that drags, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think a big part of it is just because it's a low-level part of an MMO, which is something that A Realm Reborn will always suffer with, and that's just an unfortunate side effect, because gameplay is not interesting at the beginning. As a new player, you are gonna be entertained with it to an extent, but after a while, after enough boring quest design and panning, you start to realize it's not as fun as you thought. At least I had that experience. And then as I got through the game, eventually it became more fun, but I think one of the main thing is the story kind of just slogs in the middle because it's padding out for time, and a lot of the side quests are just too unnecessary feeling because there's too much filler. And I think a big part of that is because the quest design in the Realm Reborn especially is very lazy. It's very like, bring X item to Y, now bring X item to Z, now bring X item back to Y, now talk to Y, now talk to Y again, now go talk to Z. Well done. It's very repetitive, feels very samey, and I think a main reason why quests like these are not as bad later on is because it doesn't feel like super related to whatever main story you got going on or whatever characters you're with. I do think a big part of Realm Reborn could have maybe been made better if you spent more time with individual scions, maybe. Like, you do spend some time with them, but like there's a lot of quests you're just with random NPCs or whatever doing nothing. And I think having that time to like build up relations with whatever scions you were with at the start would be nice for a Realm Reborn. It's never going to happen because they're not going to go back and change story, but I think it could have been nice. As opposed to talking to no-name NPCs 90% of the time as they ask you to deliver milk to fucking pub, and then the pub asks for you to throw the drunk guy into the puddle and drown him or something. Also, just being a Realm Reborn is the clunkiest part of the game overall, really. There's a lot of clunky clunks. But like I said, clunky. Dungeons are mostly boring at this part of the game. Post-game of A Realm Reborn sucks ass, honestly. I think 90% of it is really boring, and Moonbreeder is wasted potential. She lives for like barely any of the time. And the Alliance raids are really mid in this expansion, so there's that too. But overall it's like fine. I think the story is good for the most part when it's not shoving your face into the padding. I think the beginning and end are really good. I think the characters are fun, if not, you know, they're not their best, but they're fun. And overall, I think it probably goes like here somewhere. Right, putting it below Dirge of Cerberus feels very funny, but honestly, that's accurate. I think I got more entertainment out of Dirge of Cerberus than I did of Realm Reborn. But that's not true for future expansions. So let's talk about them. Heavensward. So the thing with Heavensward, I'm gonna say outright, I think it's more of a slog than a Realm Reborn, actually. Because here's the thing. A Realm Reborn, on first play and replay, yes, the padding's annoying, but it wasn't as bad as I remembered, right? It's bad, but it's not the worst. And I think the story is okay. It's nothing great, it's MMORPG basic-ass story that has a good ending. But Heavensward was very much not for me. Because what Heavensward is a political thriller, I want to say, is a good way to put it. Partially a political thriller, I want to add, which is part of the cons. But before I get into the cons, we'll talk about the pros as usual. Music is much better in Heavensward. The raids are very much a big part of that. I fucking love Alexander. This is the part where the voice acting changed, and I think it was overall a big improvement, so that's worth noting. Trials and Dungeons were getting progressively better through Heavensward. There's still some bad ones, but like they're getting better, which is good. A certain death scene, I think, is really well delivered. Very good scene, one of the best in 14. I think traveling with a set party of characters in the first half of Heavensward really helps things feel JRPG-y, you know? Like you have a set party that you're going with, and like it helps keep character relations focused, and you get to experience more of that Estinian and Cell banter, which, by the way, one of the best duos in the whole game. I do wish they had more voice-acted scenes together, but that's a me thing. And I would argue post-Heavensward is much better than post-ARR. I think post-ARR is the worst part of the game, but post-Heavensward is a bit better. It's not great, but it's like fine. But I need to talk about the cons, because I have major problems with Heavensward. Because there is one problem I have with Heavensward that I don't with A Realm Reborn, and it's lack of focus. The thing with Heavensward is you have 3 ongoing stories, right? You have the continuation of A Realm Reborn, with everything after the Sultan's supposed death. You have exploring the new Heavensward areas and the issues with, you know, like the Foundation and Ishgard. And then you also have finding the Scions again, which is like its own third thing. You have 3 stories going alongside each other. Now, it's perfectly fine to have 3 stories going alongside each other, but I don't like how Heavensward handles it, because what Heavensward does is it constantly interrupts you in the middle of doing one thing to then do another. In Heavensward, You start by doing a little Realm Reborn stuff, and then you obviously go to Foundation. You explore the new areas, and then, oh no, I need to go save Ralban. So then you go save Ralban. So you're going back to do like a Realm Reborn stuff. And then you go back to Heavensward to do Foundation stuff there. You do that for a bit, and you meet Estinian, you meet Cell, who's Isar at the time. And then you go back to a Realm Reborn again. And it's finding out that the Sultana was still alive, and it was a sleeping potion, which, by the way, is bullshit. And I hate that. That is a horrible retcon. As much as I love Nanamo as a character later on, I think retconning her death is a bad choice, and I think it actively harms the story, as well as the impact of death in Final Fantasy XIV, because it kind of feels like they can just write anyone back to be alive after that. You go to that, and then you go back, and then start doing Virginia Cell stuff again, and then you go to the dragons, and then I think you go to find Thancred, if I remember right, or is that post? See, the thing is, everything mixes together as well, that's the problem. I don't like the lack of focus. I don't like how it goes from one story beat to another, and then back to another one that you did earlier, and then you go back to where you were, and then you get interrupted again. I think it would have been fine if they introduced Ishgard, and then you were just focused on finishing up the Realm Reborn stuff or something like that, and then you went to Heavensward stuff, or you just focused on the Heavensward stuff, and then the post-game of Heavensward was more so the going back to deal with a Realm Reborn stuff or something like that. Because it just feels very jumbled. I'm not a fan of it, and also because I'm not really a political thriller story person, that whole aspect just doesn't do much for me. As well as that, ARR quest design is back and worse than ever. I think Thordan is a good boss, but as a villain, he's just kind of ultimately one of the more forgettable ones. Events to me feel like they have less build-up than in other expansions. It's probably due to like the constant like switching back and forth, but it just feels like kind of stuff happens sometimes, and they have less impact because of it. And I think that is why it will go here. Above 13.2, but below Final Fantasy VIII. I'm just not a fan of Heavensward, I'm gonna be honest. Did not do much for me, and on replay it did less. We're very close to the end now. And this is a step up for me, because I enjoy Stormblood. I'll start with the story. There's a lot of cons to the story, of course, and we'll talk about those, but while it's kind of weirdly split up between Alamigo and then the Aldoma stuff, I think the story's overall really fun. And I think a big reason why it has a bad rep, outside of the weird split, is because Stormblood is a war story. It is a war story that follows after a political thriller. And you are basically appealing to two different types of people with that, I think. Like, maybe there are people who like political thrillers and war stories, I'm sure, 100%. But I think when you go from one very strict kind of like genre of storytelling to another, it can throw people off. And for others, it will engage them again. For me, I was one of the ones who didn't like Heavensward, and I went to Stormblood, and I went, yes, I like this a bit more. At the first time playing it, I did have problems with it, and it was a point where I probably took the most breaks in between, but overall looking back, I think it's like a really good expansion. I think post Stormblood is like one of the best parts in the game. I think the Evilise raids are my favorite Alliance raids I've played. I think Stormblood is around the time when a lot of classes actually become kind of fun to play. I noticed, like, I think this is around the time I really started enjoying Ninja and really started enjoying Monk. I don't think they're insane at these levels, like insanely fun, but I think like every job is almost every job is most fun at its max level. Almost, emphasis on that. But I do think they start getting fun around Stormblood, and that's good. As well as that, I think Xenos is a good villain. I really like Xenos. He makes for a really great passive antagonist. Not like just a true main villain, but just a passive antagonist, a unstoppable force that you know is there. I like that. I like that he's a constant threat that you have to think about, because it really adds a tension that just looming over, like, when is he gonna do something? And I love that. As well as that, Stormblood, another improvement on the OST once again. And yeah, that's kind of it for my pros. For cons, I don't have much actually, surprisingly. But again, like I said, I think Stormblood also has a lack of focus issue, but at the very least it did it in a way I prefer over Heavensward. Whereas with Heavensward it's like one thing, then a second thing, then the first thing, then the second thing, then the first thing, then the third thing, then the second thing. Stormblood is just, okay, you've spent like 20% in Alamigo and then you're going to Doma. Bye. And admittedly, I prefer the Alamigo stuff over the Doma stuff, so I wish Alamigo was more prominent, but I do appreciate that, like, you go from one thing, you do that thing there, and then you're just focused on Doma for like a long portion, and when you go back to Alamigo, it does make sense whenever that happens. So I do like that. I don't like how it's split. I wish there was more Alamigo stuff, but I'll take it. And as well as that, the very beginning and some of the middle kind of drag on. The middle especially is really bad for Stormblood. I think Stormblood had one of the worst drags in the middle of any of the expansions, but overall, positive for Stormblood. I think it's good. I think Stormblood is up here. And honestly, now that I think about it, I'm going to move 13 up one as well, because I want it to be above A Realm Reborn. I think it's better than Crisis Core, but worse than Final Fantasy X. And while I'm at it, I'm going to move 4 up as well. I'm going to move 4 up to Amazing. Anyway, not many left. We only got 3 games left. Or rather, 2 expansions in a game. Shadowbringers. This expansion is something else. Like, this is so special to me. First of all, I think this expansion has a lot of retroactive value. Retrospective, maybe, I think is a better word, but retrospective value, where, like, I think I appreciate Shadowbringers more and more with time, and more with how much I know about the game. Like, Shadowbringers does so much for the existing story of FF14, and then when Endwalker came out and Endwalker went through, I think that added so much more to Shadowbringers as well. Along with the rest of the game, of course, because Endwalker's like the natural conclusion. I think it's really good. I think Shadowbringers is the most Final Fantasy feeling expansion, which is probably why I have a soft spot for it. It's very fantastical, it's its own world, it feels like its own adventure, which I love. I think Shadowbringers has the single best growth and development for the Scions as characters. Sadly, like, Ishtola, for example, is like not particularly great. I mean, she's fine, but like, she doesn't get as much as anyone else, but like, characters like Thancred and the twins, Rianche and stuff, I think they will get really good development here. The quests in this game, the side quests and such, they barely feel like that usual bring X to Y, and I think that's because the game does a much better job at this point of making it feel like quests feel relevant to what you're doing, or relevant to a character's progression. There's a lot of, like, they have to do the padding quests. They need quests where you need to get X thing for Y. But in Shadowbringers, it mostly feels like it's relevant. I don't like how in A Realm Reborn and Heavensward, and even a bit of Stormblood, it's very much like, you bring X to Y, and then you complete the quest, and, oh, can you go do this thing? Like, you're running chores. It doesn't feel like you're running chores and errands here. It feels like you're doing things for the sake of the progression, and that's good. That's really good. There are still obviously some quests that aren't going to be great, but this is an MMORPG, I'm not surprised. There are going to be fetch quests, there's going to be boring stuff like that, but you need the padding somewhere. And luckily, not too much of it feels like padding. I also think the ending to Shadowbringers and post-Shadowbringers is peak. I think that is amazing storytelling. I love the writing in Shadowbringers. Emet-Selch is one of my favourite Final Fantasy villains. He's not my favourite number 1. That might go to Kefka, but he's up there. Emet-Selch is up there for me. He might be my favourite. It's tough. But I guess I'm good to cons. I don't have many cons for Shadowbringers, but I do have a few. I guess compared to some other expansions, there's not much sense of discovery with Shadowbringers, which sounds a bit weird, right? It's a new area, new world, and you're like, ooh, you want to explore a bit. But compared to something like A Realm Reborn, for example, or Stormblood, once I explored the main parts of each area, I didn't feel inclined to go around and like see the scenery and stuff for a lot of these areas, especially for like a place like Amarang, for example, which is like, it just kind of feels a bit samey to deserts we've had before. It's some areas that don't hit for me and others that really hit for me, so I mean, that's really all I've got. It's that, and like I said, I don't think Ishtola got enough. I think she kind of got the short end of the stick. I don't like how she keeps being used for her fucking death flag bait. Please just kill someone at this point. Just kill her at this point if you're gonna do that. Even though I don't want you to. I've really got nothing else. It's just, it goes up with these. I'll order these soon. Anyway, we are now at the final 2. Endwalker. I love Endwalker. It's not my favorite expansion, because that would be Shadowbringers, but it is up there. Endwalker, I think, is the perfect end to what would be the base Final Fantasy XIV story, which is everything from A Realm Reborn at the beginning, all the way up to now with Endwalker. I think it is a great cap off on the developing story up to this point, and I love how it just kind of it ends a lot of the story building up to this point. I think the first trial boss is an amazing twist on expectations. I think that's really clever. I think Endwalker has some of the single best gameplay content in the expansion. I'm not referring to current like slog we're going through. I'm referring to like the first 2 weeks, you know, like when we first picked up Endwalker and we got through all those trials and everything like that. I think some of that content that is main story related is some of the best. I think all the zones are amazing, like visual style and great environmental storytelling. They're all amazing. I think the ending overall is just peak, and as you can hear, the OST is great. The thing is, as I go through these expansions, I have less to talk about because a lot of the things that I have pros and cons about are very samey between expansions. It's just that some expansions do some things better story-wise and others do things worse. So I can only really talk about story because the gameplay is like, it's always the same. It's just you get more levels and you can do more, so naturally it's better as you go through the game. So let's go into the cons. The Loporrits. Not the Loporrits themselves, just the story section around the Loporrits. The plot momentum kind of gets a bit destroyed at that point. It feels like it slows to a grinding halt. I kind of wish Meteion had a bit more development, I guess. I don't really care for any of the Ultima Thule section, just outright. I think it's kind of until like the actual like end game part, which is peak. But I think like a lot of Ultima Thule and the story around it is kind of But overall, amazing expansion. I think Endwalker is amazing, as I said, and I think it goes right here, right below FF7, right above FF4, and that brings us to the final one. Final Fantasy XV. This game is okay. It's kind of anticlimactic to end on Final Fantasy XV. And I don't have many notes about it, but it's here, so we gotta talk about it. First of all, I think the main cast take a while to grow on me, but I do like them overall. Honestly, I do like the main 4 guys. I think the 4 bros are good characters. I think the battle system's fun, for the most part. I think it kind of drags after a while, but it's like fine for a good while, and it's like it has some fun stuff to it, even if it's a bit mashy. It's a bit no-brain. That's the problem with it, really. I think the OST is amazing, as always, and I really enjoy the optional content in the DLC. I think some of that is really good. But sadly, 15 suffers from god-awful storytelling. I think the storytelling's really poor, which is a shame because it's an interesting story that's just delivered boringly. It has the Type 0 effect. It has horrendous pacing, like some of the worst pacing in the series, and I think part of that is due to how heavily side content is emphasized. The side content in this game is like 80% of it. It's like such a huge portion. You're just doing side quests and they're all fetch quests. That's the thing, they're all fetch quests. And they're all boring. But that's like most of what the game is. It's an extremely easy game as well, so to like a boring degree, which is a shame. The UI is really convoluted and there's not much quality of life. A lot of like tooltips are inescapable. It's kind of a mess of a game. I think there's a lot of charm to it, there's some fun, but it's kind of suffers from a bunch of stuff. And because of that, I think 15 goes right here. In the flawed but okay tier. It's fine. It's a 5 out of 10. It's the most 5 out of 10 you're gonna get here. And that makes up the tier list. What I think is my favorite FF game. This one is tough. It's between 6, 9, 12, Tactics, and Shadowbringers. We're gonna order them. I think in 5th is Final Fantasy IX. I think 9 is a really good story. Has some of the best characters in the whole series, but does somewhat suffer from slow gameplay and a bit of grinding. And grinding with slow gameplay is not fun. So the gameplay side is the thing that holds it back, but overall, amazing game. I think in 4th place is FF12. This is my little baby. FF12 is my nostalgia baby. This is my most favorite game in nostalgia sense, but when I look at things a bit more, how much enjoyment do I actually get from them, 12 is like 4th. Because 12 does suffer from a bit of grinding, and it does have issues with like some of the characters not being interesting. So it has a few issues. Third place, I will put Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. I think Shadowbringers is amazing. It's my third favorite. I love the story, I love the characters, I love so much about it. I think the only thing that holds it back, funnily enough, is the gameplay. Not because the gameplay's bad, but because my number one, I think, has my favorite gameplay in the whole franchise. And my number two, I think, has the better story and characters. I think Tactics is my number one Final Fantasy game. Final Fantasy VI is beloved. It's amazing. I think it has some of the best writing in the whole of this franchise. I think it's an amazing ATB game. The best ATB system would go to 10, but 6 is the second best, I think. 6 has almost entirely, like 90% of the caster stand out. The second act is perfection. But Tactics has something above the rest. And that's everything. Tactics is a different type of game. It's a TRPG. Its gameplay is amazing. I think it's the perfect amount of challenging, albeit a bit frustrating at first, but when you understand what you're doing, really good. I think the story is peak. I think the characters are peak. A lot of this game is peak. And at first, when I was first rating these games, I thought Tactics was like, here, right? But as time has grown, I've appreciated it more and more, until eventually, it's just become my favorite. Hello! Yeah, that was the FF tier list video. It's been about a year and a half since I did that stream, and considering my notes were pretty rushed, I hope you can forgive any rush points or things I completely skipped over. But anyway, this video took a long time to edit, as I decided to manually crop it all myself. You know, I made an over 4-hour stream, close to 2.5 hours, which was a lot of work for someone working a job and committing myself to other things like music. But I did have a lot of fun doing it. I want to talk a bit about future streams and the future of this channel and stuff, because it's kind of tricky. I was hoping to only take a year break, but it's likely going to go on for another year for one simple reason: I can't easily stream my current situation. Seen any of my stuff last year, you know the drill. However, it does look like by 2026, I will likely have the money to buy my own place, so I'm gonna lay out the plan. So, the plan is that I'll be streaming again in 2026. As well as that, I'm currently laying the groundworks for future stream ideas. In fact, following this final tier list, I am currently playing almost every single Dragon Quest game, which comes to a list of about 30 games. For reference, that is about 2 more games in the FF tier list, and that's if you include each expansion as a separate entry. So it's a good bit bigger, honestly. I have finished about 7 of the games so far. Got 2 on hold, and I'm currently playing Dragon Quest XI-S for the first time, as I've only played default EQ11. But anyway, after that, I also plan on streaming, playing and streaming every single Fire Emblem game. Though this will likely be, as I said, I want to stream it, so it'll probably be by about 2026. Fingers crossed. But yeah, besides that, I got a bunch of other stuff in the works. I have plans for my new setup, and even a re-debut, which is hopefully the final one. And that'll be it. So yeah, no proper outro. Strangers of Paradise's peak. Bye bye.